minimal language barriers, so she finds professionals who can help the deaf. And so someone from St. Augustine is selling their home and they're deaf, relocating to Tampa, wanting to sell their home. And so she reached out to Anwar and said, would you be willing to list this home? Now it is, she said, would it be okay with you because it is a mobile home or something? So it's lower end. But Anwar's like, yes, especially right now, I'm figuring things out. Why not? So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And just let's make sure that we're working together so that you all are comfortable and we're clear on what you're communicating and the different pieces of the listing agreement, which we will get into next week.
Yes.
So depending on, do you have a timeline for when?
We've been trying to not push away, but not rush anything because we are so unfamiliar, but I don't know. He hasn't been in touch with this seller, just the agent who's assisting. So.
All right, great. We'll figure it out. Get an idea on timeline and contact information, and then we can.
And also the person who's selling is like 80 or something, so that might be. I don't know if that's going to be harder as a deaf and older person. It might be.
Yeah. It shouldn't be unless they have special situations.
Yeah.
Or special needs.
Yeah.
For any, of any reason.
Right.
So, okay. So, on the financing part, I feel like we kind of rushed through this. I just want to make sure we're okay on this. With financing, we're identifying the type of financing, but before we identify the type of financing, we have to be clear as to whether, if you're getting financing. So are you doing this cash? And then the next two options are, if not cash, then you're getting a loan. Now, when I get a loan, if I'm doing a traditional loan, there's automatically a financing contingency. In other words, I have to have time to submit my application, or I have to be given time to submit my application. I have to be given time to get pre-approval. I have to be given time to get approval. I have to be given time to get the money. And then I have to be given time to make sure that I have the money, the differential. That idea of application, loan approval, all of those different elements are all what we call contingencies. We kind of identified some of them yesterday, but those are all basically contingencies in the purchase and sale agreement or the contract between the two parties. As an individual, I have every right to remove any contingency that I desire. I just have to understand the ramifications of doing that. So the option of a loan without a financing contingency is just saying, I do want to get a loan, I have to get a loan, but I feel confident enough in my ability to get a loan or generate the funds I don't have that I'm going to remove the financing contingency. And a lot of times when buyers think to do that, or when they're counseled well by an agent and they do remove their financing contingency, they don't know that leads to other things. So just like we say here, if you're going to remove the financing contingency, and this is the words behind what's written, then we're going to remove lines 48 through 112. And so what that's going to do is that's going to remove your application timeline, that's going to remove your loan approval timeline, and it's also going to remove your appraisal contingency. And I think sometimes, or we've seen, is that when a buyer elects to remove their financing contingency, they're not well informed of what the ramifications of that are. And I'm all about a buyer selecting or creating, or with their counsel, realtor counsel, creating a strong offer. I just really want to make sure they understand anything that means to them. Mm-hmm. So we want to be clear that if they do remove their financing contingency, those other contingencies go away also, and find out if they're not comfortable. And if they're not comfortable, and say, wait a minute, I'm removing my appraisal contingency? No, I still want to know that the property is going to appraise. Well, then we just have to add that back in.
Right.
And we can do that in the purchase and sale agreement under paragraph 17, which is a kind of catch-all paragraph. Mm-hmm. So just so we're okay there.
What would the timeline be though? It would just be whatever you say. You would still have a choice to choose 30 days closed, but without the contingency.
If you remove your contingency, then you choose, then one of the things you're choosing is when you want to close. Okay. you wouldn't be choosing there. You'll see that there are three options when it comes to closing, or choosing a closing time. I can either choose a closing time based on my loan approval, I can choose a closing time based on a date specific, or I can choose a closing time based on the acceptance between the buyer and the seller. So if I remove my financing contingency, I can no longer choose a closing date related to loan approval because loan approval went away. So my only two choices then would be from acceptance date or on a date specific.
Right.
The challenge with the date specific we'll see is that time frame again.
Yeah.
Making sure that everything can happen. And that's why I say please don't just let the purchase and sale agreement fill in the blanks for you. Fill them in even if you use the same number that's already the default, because then you know what the numbers are, what the number of days, I shouldn't say numbers, number of days are on the timeline.
Yeah.
So you want to be in control of that to a great degree.
Okay.
Does that make sense and answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. So once the buyer has elected to identify that they are going to get a loan, if they choose a loan without a financing contingency, you move straight down to page 3. Otherwise, you need to fill in the information related to their loan, and that's the type of loan that they're going to get. This is why having a loan officer involved is so important. Example, my sister and brother-in-law, when they were selling and buying, since he's military or retired military, he has obviously VA capability. In other words, he can get a VA loan. His intention was to go conventional, but he gave me a pre-qualification good faith estimate. That's what it was. He gave me a good faith estimate and said, can you just take a look at this and see if this looks accurate? And I thought, this is not my area of expertise. So I pulled in one of our preferred lenders and said, can you please take a look at this? And he said, well, this is accurate, pretty good. It was with USAA. This looks good. Here's what I can tell you it would be if it were conventional. But I think this is probably the better way for them to go. But here, let me make a suggestion. And his suggestion saved them $9,000. So having that extra set of eyes is always really good. To your question from yesterday, if I wanted to put 5% down versus 10% down, but I was going to do 10% to make it look stronger, but change to 5% later, again, I still stick with the premise, be honest and upfront when you go in. And if you make a change and that change doesn't impact the seller and is to your benefit, then great. Any change in financing type can impact the seller. So you do have to get agreement before changing financing type and show to the seller that it's not going to impact them cost-wise. Most sellers think about FHA and VA from the past, where VA, there were certain things that a VA buyer couldn't pay, so the seller had to pay, and the same for FHA. The other thing that still does exist with VA that sometimes scares sellers away is that obviously a buyer can have their own home inspection, and should. In addition to the traditional home inspection that a buyer would have, a VA buyer, the appraisal is similar to an inspection. Not as detailed,
Right.
but similar. So a VA appraiser may come back and say, yes, the house will appraise at $300,000 if these things are done. If these things are not done, it won't appraise at your contract price of $300,000. So then we may have to, if the seller's saying I won't do those things, the buyer either has to decide, are they going to do those things themselves and complete them before closing, so potentially investing in a house that they don't currently own, or are they going to try and negotiate on a low appraisal? So that sometimes scares sellers away, but here's what I'll tell you. Conventional and FHA are also putting contingencies on appraisals now.
Oh.
So, again, mez a mez, FHA, VA, conventional, pretty much the same across the board.
Yeah.
Really no impact to the seller. But if an agent, if a realtor doesn't tell the seller that, then the seller ends up cutting out a piece of their market by saying, oh, I don't want
Well, like if you have an older home maybe or something that needs a little bit more work, then maybe you wouldn't want to have an FHA buyer because then the FHA requires that there's no peeling paint or something. And if there's peeling paint, even on the exterior, then they would have to fix that before closing.
You are correct. Anything that comes up on an appraisal contingency would have to be fixed prior to closing
For any loan?
for any type of loan.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Conventional may be a little more flexible. They may allow you to negotiate something. But for example, my house was built in 1919, and when the buyers bought it, they were using conventional financing. On the second floor, there was a door that opened up and literally went to nowhere because it used to have a Juliet balcony on it.
I
But
just like that.
okay.
Yeah.
But the people before me, when they had taken it off to do the roof, they never put it back on. And I never found a reason for it, so I never put it back on. But the buyers, when the appraiser came, the appraiser said, that door has to be sealed off. So obviously sealed off could mean, taking the door out, putting a window in. But what they allowed us to do was put brackets on and solid brackets so that the door, it was drilled into the door and into the frame.
That's how ours is,
Yeah. So that was a requirement, and it was conventional. Otherwise, they wouldn't loan.
Because it was such a safety hazard if they were to walk off.
They felt, yeah.
Yeah.
If someone was silly enough to open the door and walk out.
Yeah. Yes.
I suppose if someone had been having a good time, maybe. But anyway, so that comes across on all financing now. So I think what becomes important is that we really know our market. So for example, this house that you may be listing, it's important to take a look at not only what we believe the value of the home is on its current foundation, and what I will say is questions we're going to need to ask if it truly is a mobile home as you get further into this, is what is the land that it's on? Is it leased land or is it owned land? So if it's leased land, then you're only selling the mobile home, and that really wouldn't be within our spectrum.
I didn't even think about that.
If it's owned land, then yes, you're selling the mobile home and the land. It could just be a mobile home on a large piece of land, and it's one package, no problem. But there are mobile homes within mobile home parks where the mobile home is sitting on leased land. And if it's leased land, then you're just selling the mobile home, and that's outside of our spectrum.
I see. Yeah.
Good morning, thank you. So, thank you very much, have a good day. Thanks. We have to kind of watch for that kind of thing, just to make sure that we're operating within our spectrum.
Yeah.
Does that mean we can't advise them? No, we can still advise them, and we can still find people to help them. But we just have to make sure that we're operating within our scope.
Yeah.
So, but identifying the type of financing becomes important, especially with FHA. Again, I apologize if I didn't explain that well yesterday.
You did.
When you've got your purchase price, you got this number on line 59 or whatever it is these days. 59 has to be the same as whatever the negotiated purchase price is. Otherwise, you're committing the buyer to pay even if the appraisal comes in low. That you're not giving them the options to negotiate. So we just need to watch that. And FHA is the only one that we need to fill that in on.
Okay.
Otherwise, VA and conventional, already written in there.
Right.
It's an appraisal contingency. The main emphasis of paragraph 2 is the appraisal contingency. So, watching that. So, and USDA is thrown into conventional because it's a similar type of qualification, although USDA does offer 100%. It is mostly available only in rural communities. So there are places in St. Johns County that it is available, which is great.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on, the buyer has an opportunity to make application for a loan. Oftentimes, based on your buyer consult, your buyers that you're working with will be encouraged to go ahead and start the process, even though we don't have a home yet. And that's a good thing. You want them to meet with a lender that you feel comfortable with, that's going to be open with you and talk to you and talk to them. You don't want to be going out showing a bunch of homes before you do get that pre-qualification, because it can be one of those things that really deteriorates the relationship, because the buyer's embarrassed. You've been showing them $450,000 homes, but they can only afford $250,000, and they're embarrassed. Now you have to try and repair that and build back that relationship.
Right.
Same thing on the other side, though. You're showing them $450,000 homes, and they can afford $600,000, and then it just means a conversation of what are you comfortable with.
Right.
So, but they do need to make application. And here's the other thing about this. You'll see that this says that the buyer will timely furnish any and all employment, financial, and other information required by the lender sufficient to generate a loan estimate. A loan estimate is also known as the good faith estimate. A loan estimate. Require that the appraisal or other lender required valuations be ordered and obtained without delay. This is really important. Pay all fees required by the buyer's lender and make a continuing diligent effort to obtain loan approval, otherwise the buyer is in default. So it's your responsibility as the realtor working with the buyer to make sure they're doing all of these things. That means it's your responsibility to say, we have the pre-qualification letter, have you turned in all of your documentations to the loan officer? It's your responsibility to say, by the way, and here's what's not written in here that I wish we made more of an emphasis on. After the bubble, things blew up and everybody was blaming everybody. Oh, it's the lender's fault, it's the realtor's fault, it's everybody else's fault. The government stepped in and said, okay, look, time out. You're being predatory, Mr. and Ms. Lender, because what you're doing is you're not being truthful about lending, and you're forcing people to choose one lender. Why are you doing that? Because you're telling them that if they go to more than one lender, that it's going to impact their credit. They're not going to be able to afford as much. So you're being predatory because you're trying to hold them close to your vest and say, you have to work with me now because otherwise it's going to impact your credit. The good ones weren't.
Right.
It's the one bad apple that was the problem. So in came the government and created something called CFPB, Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And they have quite a bit of information, quite a bit of guidelines in there, both for the lender, both for the mortgage brokers, and impacting the realtors. But a couple of things that are in there that are positive for your buyer are, look, here's the deal. You shouldn't be tied to one lender unless you choose to use that one lender, and that's okay. But if you want to shop lenders, you should have the opportunity to shop lenders. So the CFPB guidelines say you, Mr. and Ms. Buyer, from the first time you have your credit pulled for a bona fide home loan, not a credit card, but a home loan, you have 30 days to check with as many lenders as you would like, and it will not impact your credit. Now, day 31, if you haven't selected a lender, and you're still having people pull it, it can impact your credit.
Wow.
But within that 30-day window, you can check with as many people as you want to see what the best rates, best lending opportunities are, best programs. Anybody you want. You've got 30 days. At the end of 30 days, if you haven't selected a lender, that's up to you. However, it can impact your credit if all of a sudden you keep having people pull your credit. Once you've decided to use a lender, once you've elected to use a lender, you have to tell the lender, I want to use you.
Oh.
So you have to sign a form that says, I'm electing to use you. Now, of course, these are the guidelines in CFPB. It's not the way that it works in reality.
Yeah, I've never seen that.
Yeah. So it's one of the forms that when your lender provides you with a stack of forms that you just sign,
Oh,
it's in there.
okay. Yes.
But, and that's not a bad thing, because usually people don't start signing the forms until they feel comfortable with the loan officer they're working
Right.
with, right? So it's not a bad thing. It's just, it's another one of those things that consumers don't get, don't know.
Sure.
First, the 30 days, very, very important. Second, when you choose to use a lender, so if you're my loan officer talking to you, and we say, yes, we want this to work. I'm signing the documents, I'm signing the application, I'm signing the other documents. One of those documents is a document that says, I'm electing to use it. Now, I'm using just plain English. I mean, everything is legal, yada, yada, yada. But I'm choosing to use you as my lender. What the guidelines say, the guidelines were there to help hold our lenders and loan officers and mortgage brokers to a higher standard. It's also there to have some responsibility to the buyer.
Yeah.
And what it says is, once I've chosen you as my lender to work with, then within 3 days of doing that, I need to stroke a check to you for the appraisal.
Oh, okay. Within 3 days. Okay.
And then within 3 days of stroking that check, in other words, within 3 days of paying for that appraisal, I need to tell you to order that appraisal.
Sorry, I really have to scan this.
Oh, you're fine. So there's a responsibility that I have as the buyer. I have to perform. It's telling us I have to perform. I have to give you my papers. Otherwise, I'm delaying the process and I'm in default. So if I don't give you my papers and I don't do what I'm supposed to do, I'm in default. Well, one of the things that's not written into any of these documents, this includes FAR, BAR, or NEFAR, is, look, Mr. and Ms. Buyer, you need to go ahead and pay for your appraisal and tell the lender to order it. And here's what happens. The buyer goes, oh, I don't want to I don't want to pay the $450 for the appraisal. Well, first of all, if you're buying a $50,000 house or a $500,000 house, you got to have some investment.
Yeah.
Second, don't you want to know the value of it if we get down the road that far? Well, I don't want to pay $450 and never get it back. Okay, get it. You don't want money going out that you don't have coming in. Totally get it. However, here's the deal. Even if I pay for that appraisal right now, so I elected to use you, I've given you money for the appraisal, I'm telling you to order it, I'm going to tell you it's not going to get done right away.
No.
This is...
We just waited, I think, was it 3 weeks for an appraiser to come, like to approve.
Yeah.
And we paid over
Yeah.
I mean, it was insane.
It is.
Yeah.
So you know exactly what we're talking about.
Yes.
And so we have to be there to calm our buyers' fears too. Look, Mr. and Ms. Buyer, it's important that we get an appraisal. 2, it's important that it's done in a timely manner. Otherwise, we can't get loan approval. 3, if you don't have an appraisal, you won't know the value of what you're purchasing versus what you're spending. So it's important that we have this done, and here's the deal. When you pay for an appraisal, it's not like going through the grocery store. You pay for it, you get it, and you walk away. Mm-hmm. The lender has to send out for an appraiser to be willing to do it. The appraiser has to grab the request, and then the appraiser has to put it on their calendar. So it's taking about 3 weeks, 4 weeks, even longer to get an appraisal back.
Can you say it again? How soon should that be paid for and processed after and accepted?
The guidelines are that when you choose to work with a lender, within 3 days of selecting that lender, you are to pay for it. Within 3 days of paying for it, you are to instruct them to order it. Here's the challenge. I'm probably going to get pre-qualified before I ever have a house.
Right.
But when I get pre-qualified, one of the first things I'm going to do is pay the lender for my appraisal. Mm-hmm. Because if I don't have a house to work with, at least I know that I have the money there, so that within 3 days of getting acceptance, I can tell the lender to order the appraisal. And I'm within the guidelines, right? Because this is one of those things a lot of realtors don't think about or know about, and our loan officers are not necessarily watching that timeline. They're making sure they have all of the pieces. But a smart realtor is saying, so when did you pay for the appraisal? When did you order it? Mm-hmm. It's out of the timeline, you're in default. There's so many ways for people to default, and nobody wants them to. It's not something you want them to do. But when people are slowing down the process, I mean, I can't tell you how often we run into buyers who our loan officers are going, I've tried calling them 7 times and I can't get a hold of them.
Wow.
And, we've asked for their pay stubs 3 times and we still have nothing. Well, that's the buyer slowing the process. So just as the seller has guidelines that they have to follow, the buyer has guidelines that they have to follow. And if either one doesn't follow those guidelines, it's a default. Mm-hmm. And it's our responsibility as the facilitator to make sure that each of them are doing what they're supposed to do. And you'll see that in here in this document, you'll see that it gives us, you, me, no matter who we're working with, buyer or seller, the right to make all of the phone calls. Calling the lender to make sure the buyer's done what they've done. Calling the seller's bank to say, did you provide the payoff yet? Calling the agent to say, have they done the repairs yet? So you have to facilitate the process, so you have to know all the stopgaps in the process. And be aware so that you can tell the person, hey, look, you need to get this done.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get this done.
Yeah.
So that's part of what we do. So when the buyer is in default, if the buyer isn't responding or isn't turning in what they need to turn in, they're in default.
Yeah.
So it's not a good thing,
Right.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's $500 or $1,000 or $10,000, a binder's a binder. It's money that someone's going to lose. No one likes to lose money.
Right.
So the application does have to be made within 5 days, or it can be shorter. You can of course change that. If the seller is requiring a shortened timeline or makes more sense for the buyer, that's fine. No problem. You can change that. That's why it's a blank there. Buyer shall disclose and hereby authorize the buyer's lender to disclose information regarding the status, progress, conditions of loan application and loan approval, including without limitation the status of the buyer's lender's appraisal. So now we're saying, this is where you become so empowered. As the listing associate, you have the right to call the buyer's lender and say, what's the timeline on the appraisal?
Yeah.
As the person working with the buyer, you have the buyer right to call the lender and go, hey, we need an appraisal. No one's called me to let me know that they're trying to get into the house or that they're going to be there. I've checked with the listing agent, what's up? So we have a whole checklist of things that we need to do.
So you can call in your client, but obviously not the other party's client.
Absolutely, you can call them both.
You can call them either lender
This
or
document gives you the right to do it all.
Okay, interesting.
So as working with the buyer, you have every right to call the seller's lender and say, look, have you provided the payoff yet? We're 2 weeks outside of closing, and I know that the title company is going to need it.
Mm-hmm.
When you're on the buy side calling the lender side, usually you go through the title company first to see, do you have all the information you need in order to provide, a preliminary closing disclosure?
Mm-hmm.
And when they don't, that's when you start calling the listing agent or call the seller's bank or whatever, whoever we need to call. You have every right to do that.
Okay.
And of course, when you're checking on your own buyer, status of the lender's appraisal is really important. Whether the appraised value equals or exceeds the purchase price, and in most cases, you've probably experienced this. If the appraised value matches the purchase price or above, you really don't hear much. It's the buyer's appraisal. It was paid for by the buyer. It was ordered by the lender. Sometimes the buyer doesn't even hear about it. In most cases, in order for the buyer to get a copy, which they should, they have to request it. So think about making that as a differentiating factor for what you do with your buyers. Maybe you prepare a letter that you give to your buyer a week before closing that they send to their loan officer requesting the appraisal. They paid for it, they should have it.
Mm-hmm.
And it helps people get comfortable with it. Additionally, if you do that and they give you a copy of it, you can increase your data, so that your data points, so that you know, kind of like, I sold a house in Hampton Glen 2 years ago. Let me see what comps they were using, what value they associated. Let me see what my CMA says. Let me see if the increase in value matches what the market is telling us. It just helps you become a stronger realtor when counseling your customers.
Yes, interesting.
Especially if you're staying in touch with that buyer and now they want to sell.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a good thing. Purchase price, lender required repairs, replacements, treatments. So those all have to be done. Seller's attorney, brokers to the transaction. So this is the piece that gives you, no matter what side you're on, each realtor, the right to contact everybody in the transaction.
Yeah.
The buyer and the seller hereby further authorize the buyer's lender and the closing attorney or settlement agent to provide a copy of the combined settlement statement and the buyer and the seller closing disclosure to the brokers to this transaction when provided to the buyer and the seller, both before and at closing or consummation. The seller shall, upon reasonable notice, provide access to the property for appraisers, and if not, the loan approval period will be extended by the time access was denied. So just because there's a time frame in the purchase and sale agreement, once executed contract, if you can't do what you're supposed to do, then the contract is automatically extended. So if a lender can't get in to do the appraisal, the timeline is automatically extended. The loan approval period is automatically extended. Here's where we also have to think about other things. So if the loan approval period is extended and I've requested a date specific, how does that impact my date specific to close? Mm-hmm. Right? So we have to think about all of the other pieces. When something doesn't go as we originally had laid out, we need to look at everything that was supposed to come after and make sure that we can still perform all those other things. Or when we look to extend loan approval, even if it's automatically, we may in writing have to extend closing or inspection negotiation or whatever else it happens to be.
And if the buyer's not in default on any timeline or anything with the financing, would it be, because there's a contingency, they would be able to extend without a problem, or would there be possibly a debate there?
In a case like this, the loan approval period would be extended, but that's why you really have to look at everything that comes after. So if I've set a loan approval period for 30 days and the date specific closing is 5 days after that, but now the appraiser can't get in, right? So now I can't get my loan approval, even though the appraiser was supposed to go in here, now they can't go until here, right? Mm-hmm. And now that's only maybe 4 days before my loan approval period is supposed to end, and I have a date specific for close. Well, the contract would say, well, since I couldn't get in, I'm automatically extending the loan approval period. What if I can't get in for 7 days, and now the loan approval period exceeds the date specific to close? I have to go back in and in writing extend the date specific to close. That's why I really encourage the first option, which is tie your loan approval period to your closing, and then I don't have to remember to change it.
Right.
So if something holds me from getting my loan approval and I ask for an extension in loan approval, because I've tied closing to loan approval, they automatically shift together. Right? So you just have to watch everything that's supposed to come after whatever is doing an automatic extension. If the appraisal was supposed to be performed here, but because I'm not allowed access, I just have to determine when am I going to be allowed access. And if I can't get access until here, is that enough time for me to get the appraisal to find out if I can get loan approval?
Yeah.
Right? So we just have to watch the time frames to see. And if I did a date specific that was here, and now I move the loan approval period, do I also need to move the date specific time? Mm-hmm. So just to really kind of lay that timeline out and watch.
Okay.
We have a spreadsheet, just an Excel spreadsheet that you can put in a date and it calculates a bunch of the other dates for you.
Oh, sure.
So to help you.
Very nice.
So that's the application. What does the application lead to? The application leads to the loan approval period. The default number of days for loan approval is 30 days. FHA, conventional, and VA can usually be approved within 30 days. If there is a reason to try and move faster, just check with your loan officer to find out if they can close earlier or they feel like they can get approval earlier. If your customer's already turned in all of their documentation, there may be no reason you can't get approval in 10 days, 15 days, 20 days. Depends on the program and the type of loan, but our preferred loan officers are great about keeping you in touch with what needs to be done and how quickly we can move. And if there's a problem, like especially as you get towards the end of the month when everybody wants to close, making sure that everything can be done. Mm-hmm. That's all. Just stay in touch. I mean, it's your team, so get your team around you. Mm-hmm. Work with the people you trust. If the mortgage loan is not approved within whatever time frame allotted, default number of days, 30 days, after the date of acceptance. So what we're seeing, or what we're starting to see, is how the timeline is created. And in most cases, the timeline is created from the date of acceptance. And most things move forward from the date of acceptance. However, what you're going to see is from the date of closing, there are certain things that happen prior to the date of closing, and we'll get to those items. Right now, we're working with basically 5 days for application and roughly 30 days for loan approval. So those are two of the tags that we've placed onto our timeline so far. With the loan approval period, again, it's from the date of acceptance and including the buyer's and the buyer's lender receipt of an appraisal. So we've even added that in there now. That is new as of February, actually March. That appraisal must have been received also in the loan approval period.
Okay.
If the appraisal hasn't been received and your loan approval period is ending, you need to request an extension of your loan approval period. The lack of the appraisal does not automatically extend your loan approval period.
Interesting.
Excuse me. Receive the appraisal without contingencies. So remember, if the appraisal has contingencies that have to be met in order for the appraised value to be there, we have to figure out how we're going to deal with those items, because customarily they do have to be done prior to closing. Without contingencies other than lender required repairs, replacements, treatments, marketable title, and survey map, hereinafter called the loan approval period. The buyer may terminate this agreement by written notice to the seller within the loan approval period, or be deemed to have waived the financing contingency period. Really important. If your loan approval period has an end date, which it does, that's it. Once you pass that end date, if you don't request an extension and it gets approved prior to that end date, done. No more financing contingency. So if you can no longer close because you got a letter, because you went out and bought a whole new room of furniture just before closing and your lender did a quick check and said, I'm sorry, we're not doing this, you just spent a ton load of money, then sorry, nothing to do with financing. You passed your financing period.
Then they wouldn't obviously be able to close. So would there be any other penalties other than just forfeiting the earnest money? No.
Not unless the seller was intending on suing, civil for potential costs.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Excuse me. Buyer shall provide to the seller written evidence. If the buyer has so terminated, upon written request of the seller, the buyer shall provide to the seller written evidence of the buyer's lender to buyer's failure to secure loan approval due to no fault of the buyer. Due to no fault of the buyer. So if the lender now denies the loan because I lost my job, that's not my fault, I lost my job. If the lender then denies the loan because I went out and bought a new car, that's on me.
Yeah.
So I could lose my binder if I go do something silly. That's why we also think it's really important to have the buyer consult, because one of the things we try to stress in the buyer consult is you need to go credit quiet. No revolving credit cards, no department stores, no cars, no boats, no furniture. Food for your family, utilities, that's it.
Yeah.
That's it. No vacations, no nothing. That's it. If you really want a house,
Yeah.
you got to take this seriously.
Right.
And people don't think about that.
Yeah.
It's amazing how many buyers don't think about that. Anyway.
How do buyers usually react when they hear that? Are they surprised? Are they upset?
Not usually upset, usually baffled.
Okay.
I don't understand. And you have to almost break it down. Bless you. You have to almost break it down to the basics. You're going to be buying a house. Everybody gets excited about buying a house. As a matter of fact, everybody gets excited about putting some of their stuff into their house. They think that they're going to put all of their stuff into the house, but the more they look at their stuff, they don't want that stuff in their new house.
Right.
Here's what I'm going to tell you. If you don't want that stuff in your new house, that's fine. Sell it, donate it, whatever you need to do with it. don't buy anything to replace it until after you're in your new house and know what you really want.
Yeah.
Because if you buy something, so you have to try and almost make it like you don't want them to be disappointed.
Right.
So if you buy something before you get into the house, it may not be what you really need when you get to the house.
Right. True.
So get rid of the stuff you don't want.
Mm-hmm.
Don't buy anything else.
Right.
And if you take it down to that basic level, because furniture is one of the first things that a lot of people buy before they ever get into their home.
Because they have it on order or something.
Because not even because it's on order, just because they get excited and they go, I can, Ashley Furniture is offering, 3 years, no interest. That won't hit my credit.
Yeah.
No, it still shows up on your credit.
Wow, yeah.
So it's just saying, it's the basics of when they don't get it, saying, at this point, you have everything you possibly need to get in your house.
Mm-hmm.
If you get anything else, big ticket item, that includes furniture, that includes cars, that includes boats, whatever it is, that's going to impact your new house.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, sometimes people get into situations where their car broke down, or they've been trying to get that car to go as far as it can possibly go, and it just can't do it anymore. Well, then you need to say, great, let's talk to the loan officer, find out how to make that work so that you can make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that you can get what you need to survive and be respectful to your family.
Yeah.
But let's find out how it's going to impact you, and maybe we can come up with another option for 2 months or something.
Right.
Something. But it's that counsel thing, and if you think about it, call me first.
Right.
It's sometimes making a joke of it to some degree
Mm-hmm.
is almost easier,
Yeah.
but yeah, they don't get it.
Yeah.
I will tell you, a lot of people don't get it. And that's not people who don't do this regularly, and it's not people who don't have a huge income. I'm telling you, people at very high incomes,
Right.
even cash buyers who have, are going into $1 million homes, sometimes don't think, because they feel like my cash flow is fine. I need to get this other car for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to get the boat now because it's on sale to put out in front of the house. And then the bank goes, look, there's a huge, big decrease in your cash base.
Mm-hmm.
Based on what you get now, we can't. Oh, I'm going to put that money right back from here. I'm sorry, it's not in there long enough. Now we have to figure out where the money came from.
Right.
It has to sit there for 90 days.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're on a 90-day delay on our closing. The seller's going, I'm sorry, I'm not going to extend 90 days because you were stupid and bought a boat.
Right. Oh my gosh, yeah.
I can't tell you how frequently it happens.
Mm-hmm.
People don't think.
Interesting.
Yeah, and again, it's across the board.
Right.
It's across the board. It's not unique to any level.
Yeah.
It may happen more frequently at certain levels, but it's not unique to any level
Yeah.
of purchase power. So
I feel like that would be good to add, like, on I don't know what you guys offer for the consults, but maybe like a sheet with things to remember, that being one of them,
we have a do's and don'ts page.
Okay.
So you can maybe want to, if you think of things you want to add to it, great, absolutely,
Okay.
customize it,
Yeah.
definitely. Let's see. So once you hit that loan approval period, that's it. If the buyer does not terminate this agreement prior to the end of the loan approval period, neither the buyer nor the seller shall have the right to terminate this agreement under this paragraph. The binder deposit shall not be refundable because the buyer's failure to obtain financing, and this agreement shall continue through the date of closing. If the buyer has not terminated this agreement within the loan approval period due to failure to obtain loan approval, and should the appraisal or valuation contemplated under this paragraph 2 fail to equal or exceed the purchase price, and should buyer not terminate this agreement within the loan approval period due to the appraisal value failing to equal or exceed the purchase price, the buyer shall be deemed to have elected to proceed with consummation. So if I'm at my loan approval period and I still don't have my appraisal, I need to request an extension in the loan approval period to make sure that my appraisal comes in during the loan approval period. If it comes in outside the loan approval period, I can't use it to get out.
Mm-hmm.
right? So I either have to negotiate with the seller if the seller's willing to negotiate. Here's the challenge. To extend the loan approval period, I have to ask the seller if they're willing to do that. Some sellers say, I'm sorry, no. So, but then I know, no, I can't extend the loan approval period. Well, then I'm sorry, Mr. Miss Seller, I have to back out now because the appraisal's not in and I'm not willing to move forward without knowing what the value of what I'm buying is.
Right.
So, it can be a push and a,
So whose fault would that be? Just to make sure that you have a good lender? Is it probably most likely the buyers not being quick enough to provide everything that was needed, or what? How do we prevent that from happening?
You just hit all the keys. I have to make sure that my buyer is doing what they're supposed to be doing, or the buyer is doing what they're supposed to be doing, paying for their appraisal, telling the lender to order it, providing their documentation. If for any reason there's a delay on the buyer's part, it's a default by the buyer. If the buyer has done everything that they can do, and that's why it's important to stay in touch with the buyer and what they're doing, and the loan officer to see if they're truly doing it. Some people think they have, and then we find out that they may have missed a step. So once we find out, okay, the buyer did what they were supposed to do, then we have to look to the lender. When did you put the appraisal out there, or request the appraisal? When did someone grab it? Because it's no longer that you can say, I want you, Jessica, to appraise this house.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put it on a round robin.
Yeah.
The lenders have to put it on a round robin. Now, a realtor can say to a lender or a loan officer, this house is in the historic district. If you could get an appraiser who's familiar with the historic district, that would be great. Because what happens sometimes with the spinning of the wheel, and what we experienced a lot, and I use the historic area because it's where I used to do the majority of my work, is we would get an appraiser from Lake City and not understand the integrity and value of the properties in the historic area and just look at them as old homes that needed work.
Right.
Excuse me. So you can make a request. That doesn't mean that that's what you'll get.
Yeah.
But you can make a request. And I will say the majority of the good lenders are willing to take and find a pool that is familiar and choose from the pool, or offer the appraisal out to the pool. The guidelines, the governmental guidelines, require the appraiser to offer it out to a pool of individuals, not to continue to support one appraiser.
Oh.
So they have to give it out to a pool. So is it truly a pool? Yes, it's just a pool that's more has a greater understanding and knowledge of a particular product type.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's yeah. So if the buyer hasn't done what they're supposed to do with the sellers, and that's why it's important to watch that timeline and watch that. Make sure you're checking with people and know what they're doing. Teresa, a UPS was dropped off.
Oh, like an envelope with money?
Like potentially an envelope with money.
If it's a package, I don't care. I want like an envelope
Sorry.
with money.
Sorry, UPS dropped off an envelope may contain money.
I do believe that it's money.
Cool. So this is why all of these timelines are so important. 5 days, 30 days. People think, 30 days. But if we're getting to a point where we're at the end of that 30 days and we haven't made the request, or if they deny the request, then we have the right to do something else. We have the right to back out. So it's a bilateral contract. There are two parties, two sets of responsibilities. If you say no, then I just have to make my decision on what I'm most comfortable with. Right? So, but if they don't back out before the end of the loan approval period, they can't get out, not only because of the inability to get a loan or loan approval, but also the inability to get their appraisal, or if the appraisal comes in low, they can't back out. Can they still negotiate with, or attempt to negotiate with the seller based on a low appraisal? Sure, absolutely. The seller has no obligation to negotiate at that point either.
Right.
Maintenance, inspections, repairs. This is another good one. This is nice. In this most recent version, we moved maintenance, inspection, repairs from like paragraph 12 up to paragraph 3, just because it's one of those things we have to get our mind wrapped around. So the seller will maintain the property in its present condition until closing, except for normal wear and tear. It's one of those things when we go over forms that we argue over all the time, because normal wear and tear is so subjective. You know, you're going to go into a home and it's going to be immaculate, I might go into a home, normal wear and tear would be like throwing things up against the wall, scratching it, you know. So it's really subjective, and we have to prepare our buyers for that too.
Yeah.
And any agreed upon repairs, replacements, treatments. If the buyer elects not to have inspections and investigations performed, or if they fail to perform them in a timely or fails to make a timely request for repairs, replacements, treatments as set forth in this paragraph 3, the buyer accepts the property in its as-is condition. Here's one of the things that a lot of realtors, not only in our board, but outside of our board, don't understand. This document is an as-is purchase and sale agreement with the right to inspect.
Right.
This document does not require a seller to make repairs. It does not require a buyer to have an inspection. It does not require a buyer to make a request for repairs. This document is, you're buying a house. If you want to have an inspection, go for it. If you want to make a request for repairs, go for it. But here's the timeline you have to do it. And if you don't want to, that's fine too. You don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
But know that you're buying the house as is then.
Yeah.
Right? So, because we get requests from agents who primarily use the FAR document, we get requests from them going, well, you need to write it on the FAR as is. Well, no, this is an as is. Well, no, it's not. Well, yeah, it is. And then we're back to lazy realtor syndrome. It's not that it's not, it's just that I don't want to read it to know that it is. Mm-hmm. So, and the FAR is an as-is purchase and sale agreement also. It's an as-is condition, accept the property in its as-is condition as of the date of acceptance of this agreement. So the buyer will be responsible for the repair of all damages to the property resulting from inspections and investigations, and the buyer will return the property to its pre-inspection conditions. These obligations shall survive the termination of the agreement. What this is saying is that if I choose to have an inspection, and that's any inspection, roof inspection, full home inspection, AC inspection, groundwater inspection, you know, if I want to have some voodoo person come and do, I can have any of that done during the inspection period. And anybody who comes onto that property, I'm responsible for. So if my voodoo person comes onto the property and trips and falls over the sprinkler head, that's my thing. That's not the seller's thing. So if they trip and fall and hurt themselves, that's my thing. I have every right to bring them on, but I take responsibility for bringing any of those people onto the property. The only place that changes is if something happens to someone I bring onto the property because the seller didn't disclose to me. So you'll see it in distressed properties. You'll see in the private remarks, do not enter home through front door. You know, hole in floor, inside front door. Mm-hmm. Well, if I enter through the front door and I fall into the hole and I scratch my leg, it's my fault.
Yeah.
If I don't tell my inspector about that, that's my fault, my responsibility. However, the seller never tells me that there's a hole inside the front door and I go in the front door, that's the seller's fault. Mm-hmm. So it's just taking responsibility for the people that are there. You have to kind of figure out or be realistic. You know, if I'm bringing someone on, my thing. If I send someone there, my thing, unless I'm told otherwise.
Okay.
So it's open line of communication. Access to utilities, the seller will make the property available for inspections, investigations during the time provided for inspections and investigations, and agree to have all utilities, including but not limited to electricity, fuel, gas, water, active from the date of acceptance of this agreement through the date of closing. And if not, the time for inspections and investigations will be extended by the time access was denied, but not less than 2 days. So if you say to me, Clark, I need to get into the house to do an inspection, and you say, I want to go tomorrow. And I say, I'm sorry, you can't go till Monday. And you're like, well, Monday's kind of the inspection period. Well, because I'm denying you access, you can extend the inspection period, not to Tuesday, but to Wednesday. That's 2 days.
Okay.
Right? So a minimum of 2 days, you get to extend it. If access is denied. But let's let's look at this for a minute. This is saying the seller must make the property available and have the utilities accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Can you think of any times that this is going to be a challenge?
Foreclosures.
Short sales, not necessarily foreclosures, but pre-foreclosures. Foreclosure, usually once the bank has taken it over, our banks are usually fairly good about trying to keep utilities on, unless it was a short sale or pre-foreclosure and someone got upset and, you know, tore out the toilet or tore out the sink or removed fixtures or whatever it happens to be, then utilities may not be able to be put on. An electric company, a water company, they're not going to turn on utilities if the utilities have been off for any period of time without an inspection.
Right.
Why? They don't want something to happen to the property when they turn it on. Right?
Yeah.
So it sounds like you've experienced some of this.
Well, up north, we turn off utilities if it's a foreclosure because pipes will burst without
Sure.
using them, so they just turn them off.
Makes sense.
And many times we used to buy a lot of foreclosures, and inspections were almost impossible because we're like, we don't want to tell you that there's a leak, but they would go around it and there would be red flags. But once we forced them to turn on the utilities, and they did, and sure enough, there was a leak that they didn't disclose, but they obviously knew about. So, yeah. But that's not what I'm seeing here, so it's interesting.
No, not as much anymore. I think we might be on the upswing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, with the forbearance and because the economy is still in flux,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, I think we're going to see more people going, look, I can't do this anymore. And either trying to short sell their home or just walking away from their home.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, I think you've probably experienced then, when someone just walks away, they're not happy.
Yeah.
And they may do things that that would not be reasonable or they would not normally do. And that's usually damage to the property. So it's tough. You know, you've experienced it. You'll be able to relate to your customer based on what their desires are and what their goals are. There is, I will tell you, if by chance the utilities are off, there is what's called an inspection turn on. So you can go to something like Clay Electric or JEA and say, I'd like the utilities turned on for the inspection period, for an inspection. And they'll give you a certain amount of time, and then you can pay, I think it's $25 or $50 to have it turned on, and then they'll only charge you for the amount of utilities that were used during that period of time when you have it turned off. It's just that if it's been off for any period of time, they probably won't turn it on even when you ask. So at least not without an inspection.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge, is they're requiring the seller to have the utilities on, but if I can't get them on, how are we going to see how's it going to be inspected? Then you're probably going to have to have a hold harmless at closing, or something that discloses that you attempted to have an inspection, or that the seller does not, or potentially the buyer could renegotiate based on the inability to inspect the home properly.
Right.
Within a certain number of days, so this is what's called the inspection period. Within a certain number of days after the date of acceptance of this agreement, 10 days if left blank, so that's our default number of days, the buyer may, but is not required to, again, reinforcing it's as is, have the property inspected and investigated by appropriately licensed inspectors and or persons, entities holding a Florida license to build, repair, or maintain the items inspected. The buyer and the buyer's broker have the right to be present during all inspections and investigations. The inspections and investigations include, but are not limited to. So if you choose to have inspections, or if you choose to have investigations done, you have this amount of time to have them done. In our default number of days, 10 days. You can inspect anything. You can inspect the structure, the appliances, the heating, the cooling, the mechanical, plumbing, well, septic, saltwater. So if you're having a 4-point inspection done, obviously all that's included. Not all of that. The 4 major items in a 4-point are included. Saltwater, freshwater, ground permeation, intrusion, roof, solar equipment, foundation, pool equipment, bulkhead, dock, boathouse, pretty much everything. Right? You can have specialists come for whatever you want. Also, inspecting for active infestation and or damage from termites or other wood-destroying organisms. often known as a WDO, or wood destroying organism report. Determining if the property is in a community development district, and if so, the costs associated with the CDD. Verifying the cost and availability of insurance. The condominium and homeowners association insurance is satisfactory to the buyer and the buyer's lender. Verifying square footage, measurements, reviewing applicable zoning, historic classifications, covenants, restrictions, easements, rules, and other governing documents affecting the property. Everything during that time period. If you provide over the HOA docs or the condo docs to your buyer and they don't read them until after the inspection period, and now they find out they can't keep their 40-foot mobile home in the community, and that's why they wanted to buy the house, they can't get out because they can't keep their motorhome there. We're past the inspection period. If you thought it was, and everything you saw said 2,200 square feet, but it's actually 1,900, have to know that during the inspection period. So anything that causes them concern needs to come out during the inspection period. Insurance has been one of those issues recently. This is why we tell our realtors or advise our realtors, when you're working with a buyer, the minute they go under contract, they need to call an insurance company. Either the insurance company they're currently using, other insurance companies, a bunch of insurance companies, get a quote, find out, do you need flood insurance, and what's the cost gonna be? Because if you find out after the inspection period that the cost of the insurance is gonna put you beyond your debt to income ratios, and you're no longer gonna be able to qualify, so sad, too bad, can't get out because of that.
Yeah. Interesting.
So all those different pieces, right? CDDs, what's required, HOAs, condo docs. Do you remember the timeline on condo docs from class? How long a buyer has to review condo docs?
I don't remember.
So on a resale, it's 3 days. So from the time you receive, so here's something about condo docs. It says condo, the balance sheet, they have to make sure that the balance sheet is okay with the buyer and the buyer's lender, but you also make sure that they get those condo docs and they sign that they got those condo docs. Because on the date that they sign that they got those condo docs, they have 3 days to review it and potentially walk away. If you don't give them the condo docs, or the other side doesn't provide you with the condo docs until after your inspection period, once the date is that they sign that they got those condo docs on a resale condo, if it's still outside of the inspection period is when they receive the docs and they review them and don't like them, they can get out. That's why you want to make sure everything happens during the inspection period. And this is another one of those things that we get very lackadaisical at. Oh, it can't be anything major in the docs. I mean, it's a condo building.
Right.
How bad can it be? It's, or you get the balance sheet and it's like, whew, they're way under financed. This is not good. That means there's going to be a special assessment. Can I afford the special assessment? Can I manage this? How am I going to pay for the special assessment? So it may not be divulged yet, but if you know the balance sheet isn't covering what the expenses are, there can be a problem. Right? And it's 15 days on new construction, condo.
Okay.
If the buyer determines, so this is, here's what gets a little confusing. We're saying there are 10 days to investigate and inspect all of these things. And the buyer has agreed to take this property as is unless they want to have these inspections. Here's the other piece of this. If the buyer determines in the buyer's sole and absolute discretion that the property is not acceptable to the buyer for any reason, the buyer may, prior to the expiration of the inspection period, do one of two things. So the first thing they can do is terminate the agreement. Here's where the confusion lies. Oh, but wait a minute, it has to be something from the inspection. No, it doesn't. If the buyer determines in their sole and absolute discretion for any reason during the inspection period that they're not happy with the property, they can back out. So if you're buying a house and it happens to be in Avondale, since we're both kind of familiar with that, and you go to that house one evening because you're driving the streets and you just want to see how pretty it is at night. And you get out and you start walking and all of a sudden you smell Maxwell House Coffee House, baking their beans, right? and you're like, I don't like coffee, I can't stand that, I don't want to deal with that, I want out. As long as you're in the inspection period, sole and absolute discretion, you can walk away.
Yeah.
If your Uncle Harry comes in and says you don't want this house because there's something wrong with here, but he's not licensed in anything, and you trust Uncle Harry, you can get out.
Yeah.
And that's what we're having challenges with right now, is that buyers are going under contract on multiple properties and then using this 10-day window or 5-day, whatever the number of days they've elected, to pull out of whatever property they choose not to want.
Where does it say the amount of days?
So
To your
right
left.
here is where you would put
Oh.
in the number of days. It's a default for 10.
Okay.
It can be less if you would like, and that's where sellers are getting wise. They're saying, look, I'm not keeping my house off the market for 10 days
Yeah.
for you to just decide you want something else. I had an agent who I thought was very wise. In paragraph 17, which is the catch-all paragraph, they put 10 days in for the inspection period, and they put into paragraph 17, buyer is not currently engaged in any other negotiation or contract for any other property.
Oh.
Telling the seller, look, I'm not trying to play you against other properties. I'm in. I want to see.
Yeah.
I'm not going to back out unless there's a reason to back out.
Yeah.
So disclosed, that at that time they weren't engaged in anything.
It's paragraph 17.
Yeah, that's the catch-all paragraph. So it's their sole and absolute discretion. So if in that inspection period they decide their sole and absolute discretion, they're not happy, they can terminate the agreement by delivering written notice, and that's that termination form that we kind of took a look at the other day, yesterday. Does that make sense? Do you
Yeah.
remember that form?
Yes.
Okay. So it's just both parties have to sign acknowledging the disbursement of the binder, and then both parties agree to pull apart and walk away. However, if the buyer decides that they would like to move forward, but based on their inspections, they would like to have some things addressed, they may submit, remember, within the inspection period, submit a written request to the seller for repairs, replacements, treatments, together with a copy of all reports. Let me back up 1 minute. Here, if I terminate this, the seller, giving written notice to the seller together with a copy of all written reports, if any were done, of inspections and investigations, if such reports are requested by the seller. So if I decide to terminate during the inspection period, and I have had 7 inspections, and the seller says, but remember, because it's during the inspection period, I don't have to say why. It's my sole and absolute discretion. So I don't have to say why I'm getting out. But if the seller says, well, I would like a copy of your reports, I have to give them to them.
Do you?
But if I don't have to, unless they ask for them, if I'm terminating.
Only if you're terminating.
If I'm terminating.
Okay.
If I'm terminating, so for example, inspection period, I'm buying, you're selling, I don't want to buy anymore. I send you over the termination agreement. I have no reports attached to that. I just send you over the termination agreement. It's every right. I don't have to tell you anything. And you're like, well, you're terminating. Why are you terminating? This makes no sense to me. I was in fantastic shape. I'm amazing. You're like, why are you terminating? I don't have to give you a reason. So instead of me giving you a reason, you say to me, well, I know you had an inspection. I'd like to see it.
Yeah.
Then I have to give it to you.
Okay.
But I don't have to give it to you with the termination.
Okay.
So then you and your seller have to determine if a buyer is terminating during the inspection period, do you want the reports?
Yeah. I would.
Okay, talk to me about why.
So then you can know how to prepare for the next buyer to make sure that they know of anything. So if they're willing to make any repairs, then you would want it, right?
Okay,
No? You would,
Yeah.
Oh.
absolutely. So there's 2 different trains of thought.
Mhm.
I want those reports because I want to see.
Then you would have to disclose
Aha.
if they found out something was
So
wrong.
you either have to disclose or
Fix.
fix.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if I give you information that you didn't have before, you as the realtor
want
and
it.
you as the seller,
Yeah.
exactly. Exactly. This is why it becomes a discussion with your seller. Look, Mr. Seller, we have every right to ask for the report. They're terminating. We have every right to ask for the report. Do you want it? Well, sure, I want it. Okay, just to let you know, if you want it, and we see something that materially affects the value of the home, it either must be disclosed or fixed.
Yeah.
You comfortable? I don't want it. And it has to be their determination.
Yeah.
It has to be their determination. They either have to be, they have to acknowledge that they're willing to fix something, or they have to acknowledge that they're willing to disclose something if it materially affects the value of the property. If it's a cosmetic item, there's no obligation, obviously. But
So
if
maybe
it
you
materially
can
affects the
just
value of the property.
talk to the realtor and be like, was it a cosmetic issue or was it a structural type of an issue? And then you could find out if you want to know.
Just remember, every question has an answer. Every answer has an obligation. So you may say to me, was it, just for my information, or I may say to you, Jessica, I understand they're pulling out. Obviously, we understand. But was it a reason from the inspection report? Well, yeah. Oh, okay. Was it something cosmetic or was it something, something material? Well, I mean, you really need to fix the crack in the slab. Now you have information. Whether you saw it on paper or not, you have information. You now have to just talk to the seller. You now have either the obligation to disclose that crack in the slab, talk to the seller about fixing the crack in the slab, or getting someone out to evaluate the crack in the slab to determine if it is truly material.
Yeah.
So we have to remember that whenever we ask a question, because we ask a question anticipating a yes or a no answer.
Yeah.
The person on the other side may have diarrhea of the mouth.
Yes.
Or the hands.
Yeah.
And it just may flow.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden now, you have information.
And we're required to disclose that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Interesting.
So remember, that document, seller's property disclosure, that like 3 to 5 page document that a lot of sellers fill out,
Yeah.
just about what's going on with the house or what do you remember about the house. You kind of have to think about it that way. That disclosure is solely someone's memory of a point in time. Today I remember that I replaced the roof 10 years ago. Today I remember that I had a leak 3 years ago. Tomorrow I could completely forget about the leak, not intentionally.
Right.
It just, it was a leak. I had to fix it. Whatever. So it's solely a disclosure. That's why we tell people, look, it's good to get the disclosure, to review it for your own heart. Our lenders don't want it. So they don't want it on the purchase and sale agreement. Because anything on the purchase and sale agreement, once it becomes a contract, anything that's on that contract has to go to the underwriter, has to go to all the other aliens that are involved in this transaction. And the first person that sees that seller's disclosure and looks at it and goes, oh my gosh, a tree fell on their roof and caused a leak. Now, the roof's been repaired. There's no leak. But an underwriter might go, we need a roof inspection that says that there's at least 20 years left of life on the roof, otherwise we're not going to repair. And all of a sudden now, the seller's being obligated to replace a roof that technically is fine.
Right.
Right? So the goal is information, acknowledgement. It's not deceit. It's not, trying to hide something. It's get as much information as you can. If you have a seller's disclosure, at least
Is it required?
we require that any seller fill out a seller's disclosure.
Okay.
You can attach it to the listing in MLS. Many agents working with buyers will request seller's disclosures. It is solely a disclosure. It's solely, this is what I remember. But at least if the buyer has, this is what I remember, they can say, ooh, a tree fell on the roof and they had it repaired. I'm gonna get my roofer to go out and check and make sure the roof is okay. Okay, inspection period, exactly what it's for.
Right.
Great, let's do it. But then, when I'm backing out, I have to remember either side, seller versus buyer. If I'm working with the buyer and this buyer is backing out, I'm gonna wanna have a discussion with the buyer. Okay, so let me understand, because I'm sure I'm gonna get asked, why are we backing out? Why is this not the right home anymore? well, you know, there's another one that came on the market down the street. We just think it'd be more appropriate for us. Okay. All right. Well, you know, this is your 10-day kick-out window, so I understand. How do you want me to approach this with the seller? Well, we have 10 days to get out for a sole and absolute discretion. You're right. You do. So then I just send over the termination, no inspection report, and now you have to make the decision to ask me for it or not.
I see. Interesting.
So you have to have that discussion with your seller. What are the ramifications of us getting it?
Yeah.
This is why I'm also a huge proponent of pre-listing inspections. The more information one has, the stronger you are. I have always done a pre-listing inspection on my own home before I ever put it on the market, because then I know. And I know the condition of the roof now. I know when I did the roof, and think when I'm listing something, oh my gosh, when I'm listing something, I always recommend, because I don't know when they did the roof.
But then you have to disclose if they find.
Right, so if the pre-listing inspection comes back and I go, okay, you know, we agreed to $650 as the listing price, but I gotta tell you, here's something that we need to address. This is considered a material,
Defect?
Defect, thank you.
I thought you had it. Yeah.
A material defect that could impact the value of the home. So if we leave this as it is, we can't ask $650. We have to drop to $6. That's going to cost $5,000 to fix. Do you want to take the $50,000 loss for a $5,000 item?
Right.
I don't know. How do you want to? No, market it without. Don't tell anybody. Market it at $650. I can't. I can't. I have to disclose.
Right.
I get what you're saying to me. I can't.
Right.
I'm not going to put my license in jeopardy because you want to see if you can get $50,000 over a $5,000 item.
Right.
Not that both amounts aren't extensive.
Right.
But no, sorry, I can't do it. So you have to have those frank conversations, and it becomes. But this is why I like pre-listing inspections. I know exactly. You can look through a pre-listing inspection and go, we're in great shape.
Right.
The value exists. The pricing is good. Let's get it on the market. Do you want to address any of these other things? Let's. Home inspectors are always going to find something.
Right.
If they find one of those things, I'll address it. Okay, great. But it's as is, so even if they find one of those things and I don't want to address it, I don't have to, as the seller, right?
And what about hot water tanks or something like that? If a hot
Water
water
heaters?
tank, water heater. If there was a question that someone is wanting to under contract with their current realtor that they're under contract with, and they were asking Anwar for if he would be able to take over. He didn't think so if he's already under contract with the realtor. But I guess their realtor has interest with the seller. She's a buyer. The agent has a relationship with the seller. So he's saying that not to negotiate or not to, worry about that, or which way, I don't know, Anna was talking to this client. But regardless, she was saying if the hot water tank, if that's required for that to pass for the loan to go through.
So water heater is considered part of the plumbing. So your 4-point inspection would address the water heater.
It would.
So for insurance purposes, so you have to think about a couple of different places. So the home inspector could look at the water heater and say, water heater is old but working in fine condition. Remember, the purpose of the home inspector is to ensure that all items are working as intended.
Right.
So he could look at the water heater, or she could look at the water heater and say, water heater's old but working fine.
Yeah.
No problem. And not raise it as a red flag. Make a recommendation for replacement within the next 2 years, but everybody knows that, right? If the buyer is comfortable with that, great. Now, most often these days, an insurance company is going to require a 4-point inspection where they look at electric, plumbing, roof, and structure. Part of plumbing is they look at the water heater. So now they may see the date on the water heater, and without even understanding the condition that it's in or it's working fine, they may say water heater's too old, requires replacement. Well, to get insurance, it may need to be replaced. Then it becomes a negotiation between the buyer and the seller. Will the seller replace it? No, you're taking the property as is. I'm not replacing it. Okay, well then I'm not moving forward. Or, no, I'm not willing to take it, I'm not willing to replace it, you replace it. So then the buyer has to say, will I spend the money to replace it or not? How does this impact my insurance? Oftentimes when you go back to an insurance company and say, look, the seller's not gonna replace this, but I will replace it. Oftentimes an insurance company will say, great, we'll go ahead and give you a binder. In other words, we'll go ahead and agree to provide you insurance. We'll do an inspection within 30 days, and if you haven't replaced the water heater, we're canceling your insurance. So they may give them a period of time to replace it themselves.
Interesting.
So with the water heater, it is part of plumbing. It may come up as an item on a home inspection or may not. It most likely will come up as an item. If it's an older water heater, will most likely come up as an item on the 4-point inspection. 4-point inspection is the ability to get insurance. If they can't get insurance until it's replaced and the seller refuses to replace it, not only will they not be able to get insurance, their loan will be denied. Because a lender won't lend unless you can get insurance or
Right.
provide proof of insurance. So the agent with the seller needs to be advising them, look, you're gonna argue over a $600 water heater?
I don't know. When I read over the text message conversation with this client, and she was saying that it would cost $10,000. So I think there's some misinformation there. 'Cause I didn't think that it was
Okay,
10,000.
that sounds like a replumb.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if it's polybutylene or cloth wiring, then that's probably, well, that's electrical. Polybutylene would be plumbing, could require a replumb. Insurance companies aren't willing to take homes that have polybutylene piping.
Okay. Interesting.
So, I
Yeah.
don't know, we'd have to
Get more
through
information
it
to
a little
understand
bit
that better.
more.
Yeah.
and find out. The base question of can a water heater impact one's ability to move forward? Absolutely. And the buyer has to make a decision at that point.
Yeah. Interesting.
If I have had inspections, then, and I want to move forward, but I want to have some things addressed, I can submit a list of requested repairs to the seller, and I need to do that within 7 days. Within 7 days, buyer and seller shall have 7 days I have to do it before the end of the inspection period, and we have 7 days to negotiate the repairs and replacements. Seller's receipt of such request within which to enter into a written agreement for repairs, replacements, treatments. If the buyer and the seller have not entered into such written agreement within 7 days, then the buyer may terminate this agreement by giving written notice of termination to the seller within 3 days after the 7 days, or be deemed to have accepted the property without repairs, replacements, treatments, except as may otherwise be provided for in this agreement. So what this is saying is, if I come up with a list of requested repairs, hey,
Hi.
how are you?
Can I sit like right here?
Yeah, do you want to hear me talk, or do
Yeah.
you want to go and you can use my office if you want quiet?
Oh, I could go get my headphones out of my car.
Whatever works best for you. Jessica.
Nice to
Hi,
meet
nice to meet
you.
you.
Jessica's part of a husband-wife team that just
A
joined
what?
us. Husband-wife team that just
Oh,
joined us.
nice. That's fun.
It is.
How's your
fun,
closing
yeah.
going?
Well, it was just pre-signing, but I wanted to be there, so I will
Cool.
actually close on Tuesday.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Well, welcome. Do you have your list of tasks?
I have my list of tasks.
Cool.
What are you guys talking about? The
Purchase and sale
contract.
agreements.
Very fun.
It
All right.
can be. You may want your headphones. Anyway.
I'm gonna go get them.
If the buyer and seller have not entered the written agreement within 7 days, then the buyer may terminate this agreement by giving written notice of termination to the seller within 3 days after the 7th. So here's the deal. Coming back to our timeline, we can now add one more. We can add 10 days for our inspection period. But we can also add 7 days for negotiation of repairs and replacements, right? But remember, if we can't come to agreement, I still have 3 days to back out. Back out deadline. So, in looking at this, remember, when a buyer and a seller go under contract, they are committing to be there based on the default number of days, at least 20 days. So a buyer is asking a seller to take their home off the market for 20 days.
Yeah.
This is why the level of or the type of status in MLS makes a difference, right? It's contingent taking backups is often what people will do.
Yeah.
But in order to take backups, you have to show the property.
Oh.
Right?
Mhm.
Sellers go, I'm under contract, I don't want to show my property.
Right.
Okay, so
Then
then we
you're
either have to go pending. What?
I said, then you're pending.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know. Anyway, so the deal is, I have 10 days. From the time I submit my request for repairs, I have 7 days to negotiate. So if I submit my request for repairs on day 8, that moves me to day 15. That doesn't still give me to day 17.
Oh.
So if I finish everything early in my inspection period and I submit my request early, the time clock starts from when I submit my request for repairs. That's the upside.
Yeah.
Here's the downside. It's 7 days no matter what. So if a buyer and a seller are negotiating repairs during that 7-day window, and it's obvious that they are not going to come to agreement, the buyer has to initiate the termination. Seller can't.
Really?
Now, can the seller, or other cases where the seller has gone ahead and submitted a request for repairs, just trying to move the thing along? Sure, but the buyer doesn't have to sign. Remember, they have 7 days to decide, are we going to agree to repairs or not? And if not, I still get 3 days to say, well, since we're not going to agree to repairs, I'm out. Or, since we're not going to agree to repairs, I'll go forward, take it as is, but I want to negotiate the price. Right? So that's the challenge with the 7-day window. It's a hard 7 days, and the buyer has to request the termination. Right? So buyer's request for repairs, replacements, treatments, or written agreement between the buyer and the seller as to the same shall not eliminate the buyer's right to terminate this agreement at any time within the inspection period. So that's another hard date. The default number of days being 10 days. If, let's say, the default number of days is 10 days, and you were a good realtor and got the inspection done on day 1, and you reviewed it, and by day 5, you submitted the request for repairs and replacements to the seller, and the buyer and seller agreed right here, but now it's day 9, and the buyer's like, no, I don't want to move forward anymore. They can still get out of their sole and absolute discretion because it's within the inspection period.
Yeah. And that still holds true then if they had to get the extension, what we were just talking about, you can get an extension, but it would not still be within that same window, or the whole window would it? Do you remember what I'm talking about?
No, I'm sorry, the extension on that.
Forgot where it was. We were talking about if you were to extend something, but it wouldn't extend the whole window.
Okay, so we were talking about extending the appraisal,
Okay.
the time for the appraisal, so that it would be completed before the loan approval period ends.
Okay, yeah.
So completely separate.
Yeah.
If I wanted to extend my inspection period after I'd agreed to with the seller, it's an amendment. I have to request that extension, and the seller would have to agree to it. So can I extend an inspection period? Yes. However, once the inspection period is set, it's a hard number of days. So the buyer can back out anytime during that inspection period, even if the buyer and seller have already agreed to repairs or a credit or anything else.
Yeah.
As long as it's within the inspection period, it's sole and absolute discretion.
Makes sense.
This is why it's really important to make sure that you're, especially during the first 20 days, you're really watching the time.
Yeah.
And that you can respond effectively to your customer if they say, well, I'd like to get out now. Well, we're outside of the inspection period. We're in the negotiation period. You can request a termination, but I can't guarantee that the seller is going to offer it. It's a set 7 days for negotiation. You can request it. I can't imagine they wouldn't want to get out knowing that you want to get out. But you're outside of the inspection period. So what's the reason we're getting out now? Now we have to provide a reason.
Yeah.
In the inspection period, we don't have to provide a reason. Outside of the inspection period, we have to provide a reason.
And even if you do, it's not guaranteed.
It's not guaranteed, right?
Right.
The seller may go, no, Or the seller may say, I'll let you out, but I'm not giving you your binder back 100%.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, everything is a negotiation at that point.
Okay.
If this agreement is terminated as provided in this paragraph, the buyer and the seller shall be released from all further obligations under this agreement, except as otherwise provided in this paragraph 3. Prior to the binder deposit or deposits being delivered to the buyer shall provide the seller with paid receipts for all inspections and investigations, if any. So why do you think we would even write it in here that the buyer has to provide the seller with a copy of all receipts showing that inspections and investigations have been paid for if they want to terminate?
So there's no liens? Yeah.
Contractor liens.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that a contractor that the buyer hired, remember the buyer is responsible,
Mm-hmm.
so a contractor that the buyer hired can now come back and put a lien on the property for non-payment.
Yeah.
Because liens for contractors go with the property, not with the individual.
Right.
The buyer shall be responsible for prompt payment of all buyer's inspections and investigations. The buyer agrees to indemnify and hold the seller harmless for all losses, damages, claims, suits, and costs which may arise out of any contract, agreement, or injury to any person or property as a result of any activities of the buyer and the buyer's agent. So this is exactly what I was talking about. If I bring someone onto the property, I'm responsible for them, and I'm responsible if anything happens to them.
Mm-hmm.
Unless it happens because of something that the seller didn't tell me about. So I'm responsible. The seller shall have any agreed upon repairs, replacements, treatments completed by appropriately licensed persons within 10 days after entering into a written agreement for such with buyer, and receipt by seller of written notice of buyer's loan approval, if applicable. If applicable, because if they're not getting the loan, obviously they wouldn't have to have that. But look at what we're talking about here now. What did we just do? We just found out that, okay, so we agree to repairs and replacements here. It gets pulled out to the very last day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the seller has 10 days, day 27, to get repairs and replacements completed. According to this. And written notice of their loan approval. So it's a little conflicting because I'm not going to get loan approval or confirmation of loan approval until day 30. So now you understand why the buyer's associate's role is so important, to be able to have access to the loan officer to say, look, I've got my seller starting repairs on things that have been requested, and we've only got 10 days to do this, so we need to know whether or not you think there's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Or negotiate with the buyer's associate an extension on the time to complete the repairs.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not going to complete repairs till day 35.
Right.
Or, especially if it's something like a new roof, you may have to request an extension on that till just before closing,
Right.
till 5 days before closing or something.
Yeah.
So we really got to watch the timelines. Excuse me. For any repairs that the seller is going to repair, the seller is going to be responsible for making. The seller shall notify the buyer in writing upon completion of all agreed upon repairs, replacements, treatments, and provide the buyer with copies of receipts for the same. Again, why would the buyer want the seller to provide them with receipts for work they've had done?
For the lien.
Same reason,
Yeah.
right? Because if the buyer moves forward and the house becomes theirs, last thing they want to have is the new house with a lien on it
Yeah.
from someone who did a repair. The buyer may, within 3 days after receipt of the seller's written notice and delivery of such receipts, re-inspect the property solely to verify that the seller has completed the agreed upon repairs, replacements, treatments. So once the repairs that you've requested or the buyer's requested are completed and they've been notified, then the buyer can go back in and make sure that those repairs are completed. But that's what they're going in for, is just for the repairs they asked for.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a time to go and go, oh, by the way, I think this looks like it should be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
A walkthrough prior to closing. The buyer may walk through the property solely to verify the seller has maintained the property in the condition required. Normal wear and tear would be the option.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we have to put this in there: buyer's responsibility, repairs, replacements, treatments to the property after the date of closing of the buyer's possession Whichever occurs first will be the buyer's responsibility. So if a buyer occupies a property prior to closing, all repairs, inspections, everything should be completed and done prior to them ever getting to occupying prior to closing. We don't recommend occupancy prior to closing or occupancy after closing, only because it can not only impact loan, but it can obviously impact what happens to the property.
Mm-hmm.
So if the buyer then decides they're not gonna close, but they've lived in the house for 2 weeks, and they've ruined it. So
Right.
this is why if someone does agree to that, you'll see when we talk about possession, please have an attorney put together a pre-occupancy or post-occupancy agreement, not the realtor.
Right.
Not the realtor. Hey, how are you?
How you doing, sir?
Good, thanks. You can just drop that right there. That's perfect. Thank you very much. For title, title must be provided at least 5 days before closing. So now we found something else. We found this, where we're now coming from this point forward. And so at -5, we've got title here. You'll see we'll also have survey and municipal lien. Those are all 5 days prior to closing. Oh, wow, thanks. I know there's some money.
Can I get a name, please?
Clark, C-L-A-R-K.
Alright.
Thank you. So, at least 5 days before the date of closing, the party paying for the owner's title insurance policy shall cause the title agency to issue a title insurance commitment for an owner's policy in the amount of the purchase price. There are 2 title policies that are given. One is the owner's title policy. That's the main title policy that confirms that I, the seller, can give you or turn title over to you clean. That policy also goes to you after closing, so that if after we've closed, something comes up on the title, then you can use that policy to go ahead and fix whatever needs to be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
The second type of title policy that's issued is a simultaneous title policy. That one is paid for by the buyer, and it's to protect the lender during the time until closing, and then it's amortized after closing based on the amount of the loan. So it goes away. The other title policy, the owner's title policy, doesn't go away.
Okay.
The municipal lien search is a more detailed search. It's a variety of things. It can have some minor contractor liens on it. It could have HOA liens on it. It could have CDD liens on it. It's just a more detailed, deeper dive into lien history of the property. Paragraph 5 is your survey map at least 5 days before the date of closing. The party paying for the survey map shall cause to be delivered to the closing attorney, the settlement agent, mark only one. So either a new survey. What I'm going to tell you is if a house hasn't traded hands, or excuse me, if a new construction has traded hands in the last year, I would go ahead and get one after 1 year for new construction. On resale, I would say if it hasn't traded hands in the last 5 years, you still need to get a new survey. Otherwise, your second option is a copy of a previous survey. So the survey that was completed can be provided to the title company. The title company will review it and determine if it's sufficient to issue a title policy. So if it's not sufficient to issue a title policy, then you have to go ahead and get a new survey done.
Okay.
Where's
The paper should be,
Wouldn't have guessed it was under the printer.
would be that close?
Wouldn't have- How could it be that convenient?
Oftentimes agents will say that they'll accept a copy, or that the buyer will accept a copy of the previous survey because strategy-wise, you know, have a previous survey recertified is like $135, $150, but a new survey is $450 or $650. So it can be a strategy. It does state in here under a copy, under line 198, if the survey that's provided is insufficient to provide a policy, then a new one will be required. So if you choose that as an option, or there's a strategy, and whatever is provided is not good enough, then a new one has to be done.
So it'd be paying.
No, you'd only pay for the new one.
Okay.
The one would be given, Okay, they review it. If they're happy with it, they recertify it. If they're not happy with it, then they request a new one. You pay for one or the other, not both. And then no survey is required. Can you think of times no survey is required?
Would that be for like a condo?
Condo,
Yeah.
perfect. No survey. Cash.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So only if a cash buyer wants it, they're required to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Title examination. So these are the time frames that we were talking about a little earlier. You have 3 ways to set up your closing. One would be, I want to close within a certain number of days when I get loan approval. It's nice because those are 2 tied together, and then if one moves, the other moves.
Yeah.
The other way is to say I want to close on a date specific. A lot of buyers say, oh, I want to close at the end of the month. I want to close at the end of the month. They forget that, I don't pay a mortgage payment until after I've already lived there because I pay it in arrears. So whether you close at the middle of the month or at the end of the month, it's not going to impact when your payment is due. It's going to impact the interest that you pay. If I close at the middle of the month, I'm going to pay just a little more interest. If I close at the end of the month, I'm going to pay very little interest. So it impacts the interest amount, not the mortgage payment. My
But
mortgage
you can
payment.
skip a month if it's on a certain time.
Yep.
Yeah.
So if I close during this month,
Oh. Mm-hmm.
so I close during May, I don't have a payment till July 1st.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I pay July 1st for the month of June that I lived there.
I see.
So I pay in arrears for that. And then of course you can do a number of days after acceptance. That's most frequently used with cash buyers. Unless extended by other conditions of this agreement. So marketable title means title which a Florida title insurer will insure as marketable at its regular rates and subject only to matters to be cured at closing. And the usual exceptions such as survey map, current taxes, zoning, covenants, restrictions, easements of record, which do not adversely affect marketable title. So what we're talking about here is issuing a title policy requires that the title company review the property and agree that they will provide an insurance policy for the entire parcel.
Mm-hmm.
Extension of closing, there are certain things that happen that will automatically extend the closing. So for example, if the closing cannot occur based on the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, remember we kind of talked about that thing that helped the buyers by allowing them more time to find the right lender, but requires them to go ahead and pay for the appraisal and ask that it be ordered. So if for another piece of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau states that your good faith estimate that you receive when you first talk to your loan officer and the one that you receive, the closing disclosure itself, can't be more than, I believe it's 0.5% differential for your rate. Otherwise, the lender has to redisclose. Now, the lender you'll see has 7 days to redisclose. They can do it by mail or they can do it in person. Customarily, to do it in person doesn't delay the process.
Okay.
But if by chance the requirement to redisclose caused a delay, it would be an automatic extension of the closing date.
Okay.
Other things that automatically extend the closing date would be extreme weather, act of God, government action, mandates, government shutdowns, I don't know, epidemics and pandemics, act of terrorism or war. If any of these prevent closing, then the closing is automatically extended to within 5 days or after they can get items back on or electric back on or all those kinds of things. And then you should be closing within 5 days of everything working, but not before when you were originally scheduled to close.
Okay.
So, if force majeure or any other thing does impact it for more than 30 days beyond when you were scheduled to close, then the buyer or seller may terminate the agreement.
Okay.
If title evidence or survey map reveals any defects which render the title unmarketable, or if the property is not in compliance with governmental regulations or permitting. Governmental regulations and permitting are really a tough one because most consumers don't acknowledge that if I want to do something to my property, I can, but I have to get a permit.
Right.
So if I want to do my own roof, I can do my own roof. I just have to get a permit.
Mm-hmm.
People will do things to their home, not get a permit, and then that delays the process because now that item has to be permitted.
Mm-hmm.
And if I did it 6 years ago and the rules have changed, I may have to tear it off and redo it so that it's to current code,
Mm-hmm.
rather than getting a permit at the very onset.
Right.
Have you run into that?
No, but we were permitted to do a fence. It was a rural fence, and we just redid it over the same lines, and that was permitted without a new permit in Indiana.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Here I would still check,
Yeah.
even if you're just replacing it. And your fence company most often does that for you. They go ahead and get the permit or file for the permit for you.
Yeah.
Technically, anything with a value over $25 is supposed to be permitted.
$25.
Yeah. So when you change your ceiling fan out on a weekend,
That requires a permit?
it's supposed to. Yeah.
Oh, we have not ever. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Most people haven't.
It's so funny.
Most people haven't. Most people don't. And it's not something that inspectors look for. They're looking for enclosing a sunroom into a heated and cooled room.
Right.
They're looking for roof, electrical, plumbing. They're not looking, but technically, the value of the estimated value of $25 or more is what's supposed to trigger you to go down and get a permit. Now, in most cases, anything under, if it's under about $2,500, they're not going to bother you. It's when it's $2,500 or more is when you get into issues. But we have permitting issues all the time.
Yeah.
So if there's a title issue, the seller has 30 days. Line 234, the seller's expense, they have 30 days to fix it. If they can't fix it within that amount of time, it will be closed within, if they can fix it within 30 days, you'll close within 10 days as long as it's not before the originally scheduled date of closing. If the seller is unable, line 238, if the seller is unable to convey marketable title or cure any association, permitting, or regulatory issues, the buyer may have the right to either terminate the agreement or to accept the property as the seller is able to convey. In most cases, if something can't be fixed and the buyer still wants to buy, customarily there's something executed at the attorney level called a hold harmless, which says the buyer will hold the seller harmless for any impact that may have or any title issues.
Can I ask you a question about the permits? Right now, we referred a seller to Buzz. He has it under contract right now at the Murray Hill.
Oh, it went under contract.
Yeah.
Oh.
No, it's not under contract. It's not what I meant. But he, the problem with that property is that this is a contractor who redid the whole house, and there's no permits in place. So that was a disclosure. That's obviously one of the big reasons why it's not selling. But
He didn't mention that yesterday.
right. Well, that was a big issue, but really there's not much traffic either. So even without them knowing, there's just not much interest.
Isn't that disclosed in the MLS?
It is, but yeah. Yeah, so maybe the realtors would know and tell them. Yeah, I guess. That's true.
So you're looking for a cash buyer that wants to buy that and is willing to take the house without permitting.
Yeah. Because otherwise, then, that's what I was going to say is, I think he's been trying to get the permitting. I don't know how that works really. But he's out of state. He's an out of state. He just flipped the property from out of state.
I understand. However, now what he has to go down is he has to go down to ask for forgiveness doesn't work so well on permitting.
Mm.
So he has to go down, now apply for the permit, and then the city has to come out and inspect. So if he's out of state or out of area, and the code over there is different than the code here, and he installed based on the code there, not the code here, he could be required to pull out whatever he installed and redo it based on the code here,
Yeah.
which is probably what's freaking some realtors out,
Yeah.
and not even knowing that he's out of the area.
Right.
In addition to that, in most cases they're usually pretty flexible, but based on the amount of time it's been since he completed the items, they may be willing to come out, take a look, and even give him a permit. Or with the extent of work that it sounds like he may have done, a certificate of occupancy at this point, but he may be fined.
Mm.
But it would be in all of your best interests for him to get some permits.
Right. And I think that I'm not so familiar, but I think Honor tried to go to the county for him, and then he had to go in person. I'm not sure if he did that.
Yeah, he would have to go in person.
Yeah,
He can't go as a representative
yeah,
unless he's a contractor.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the fun part.
Yeah, I mean, as a realtor though, would you turn away someone like that and say, get your things together and then I'll be happy to work with you?
It has to be your policies and procedures. If you're talking to me, I'm going to say yes.
You're gonna say yes, you wouldn't tell them to do your thing.
I can't sell your house without the permits. A permit history is pulled on almost every property by a home inspector. Chances of us having a buyer that comes in. Now, if I went through and I found that 98% of the buyers in that market were cash, I might say, let's give it a 6-week try and give the old college try and see if we can get a cash buyer who will buy it and not ask us any questions.
Mm-hmm.
But most likely not. I'm most likely going to say, look, this market is made up of 2 different types of buyers, cash and loan. And loan is broken down to conventional VA and FHA. This market has all of them.
Mm-hmm.
You want the greatest number of people to buy your house possible so you get the greatest amount of money for it. The only way to do that is to ensure that it's permitted. Everyone, without question, 98% of the time will have a home inspection.
Yeah.
The home inspector will pull the permit history. Permit history will be given to the buyer. The buyer will see that there's no permit for a roof, no permit for electric, and you've just admitted that you. Now, here's the other thing, is the other thing you may want to take a look at is, I don't know when he finished.
At least 6 months ago. It's been
Oh, it's been 6 months?
maybe a year.
Oh, okay, all right, because you can't, if he hasn't had the home for at least 90 days, buyer can't get FHA or VA financing.
Oh, right. Yeah. I'm smelling burning.
It might be the pizza place.
Oh,
They just lit up over there. That
Oh.
happens sometimes.
okay. Yeah.
They're good nose. All right, the buyer will pay and the seller will pay. So there, in addition to purchasing, remember paragraph 1, we just say, what's the loan amount and what am I coming down with? How much down am I going to bring? We have to say who's going to pay the closing costs and what closing costs are they going to pay. The normal and customary closing costs are the left-hand column for the buyer. All of these things, recording fees, intangible tax, note stamps, simultaneous, those all go along with having a loan. Title insurance endorsements is the privilege to sign your name onto the new title policy that's being given to you. Lender's flood certification fee. This is attached to a survey. So if you're getting a new survey, there would be a flood certification fee. It runs about $25 to $35. It's required on every property in the state of Florida because every property in the state of Florida is in a flood zone. It's just, do you need insurance, flood insurance, or do you not?
I didn't know we were all in a flood zone.
Yeah. We're low. We're very low.
Yeah.
The appraisal fee, mortgage origination charges, obviously this would only be if the buyer is getting a loan and then if the lender is charging the origination fee. Appraisal fee, credit report, inspection fees, these are all the responsibility of the buyer, as well as tax service fee and wood destroying organism report. On the right hand column, these are pretty much all arbitrary or dependent upon the type of the loan. A buyer can pay for their home warranty. Currently, a lot of sellers are not willing to pay for a home warranty. If a buyer wants one, they can pay for one. Just so you know, as an agent, you can also pay for one.
Oh.
So if you would like to use it as a marketing tool, check with your CPA, but you may be able to write it off as a marketing element. So you may be able to write it off 100%. So if maybe during a certain time of year when your business is somewhat low or you're trying to generate new business, maybe you offer sellers the option that if they list with you during the next 30 days, you'll provide a home warranty to the buyer. Gives you something new to market the property with. It conveys to the buyer that the seller has confidence in their property. Also, if the seller agrees, or if you, on behalf of the seller, agree to put a home warranty on the property for the buyer and the seller wants coverage during the listing period, that coverage is all of $60 or $70. So if something would happen to the property during the listing period, they can call the home warranty company and use the home warranty company.
You said it's $60 or $70 for the warranty.
$60 or $70 for the seller's coverage,
Oh.
home warranty, as long as you're also buying a buyer's coverage.
And how much would that cost?
Buyer's coverages range $480 to $750
Okay.
based on what's covered. A VA funding fee is only required on those buyers that are using VA financing. Mortgage insurance premium would be required on an FHA loan, potentially also on a conventional loan under a certain percentage based on the lender, under a certain percentage down based on the lender. Mortgage discount points buy down the rate, so a buyer can buy down their rate or can ask a seller to buy down their rate. Survey map. In our market, the survey map is usually paid for by the seller. The FAR bar purchase and sale agreement, the survey map is customarily paid for by the buyer. So it can go either way. Closing attorney or settlement fee, that's customarily a seller expense, but the buyer can pay it. Buyer's courier or wire fees, that's getting the package to the closing. Title search, customarily a seller expense, but that's reviewing the title to ensure that there is clean title to be transferred. Municipal lien, that's that additional lien search. It used to be a buyer required item, now it can either be a buyer or a seller. Broker transaction fee is $250, and then the mortgage transfer and assumption charges, if they exist. Those are the most common for a buyer. The most common for a seller would be the deed stamps, the owner's title insurance policy, the title search, the closing attorney, the survey map, the satisfaction of mortgage. Again, survey map customary in our market for the seller. However, if it's a buyer coming from St. Johns County, they may already anticipate paying it themselves and may check that box under the buyer. 1 year home warranty, again, that can be paid for by the buyer or the seller. The mortgage discount not to exceed, if a seller wants to go ahead and help the buyer buy down their rate, they can do that. The appraisal fee, please note, if a seller agrees to pay the appraisal fee, they would be reimbursing the buyer. Remember, once the buyer selects their lender, they have to pay for the appraisal within 3 days and instruct the lender to order the appraisal.
Right.
We have a lot of agents who tell their buyers, oh, just let the seller pay for the appraisal fee. No, it has to be a reimbursement.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're violating CFPB rules.
Yeah.
And some loan officers or agents tell their buyers, don't pay for the appraisal until after the inspection period so that you can determine if you really want to move forward. No, CFPB guidelines require you pay for it and tell the lender to order it. Remember, when you find the house, if you haven't already found the house, when you find the house, you should have already paid for the appraisal. You would now instruct them within 3 days to order it. If they order it within 3 days, it's not going to get done in 7.
Yeah. And so
Very
if they
rarely.
pay though, and the inspection is never done, or the
Appraisal?
yes, if the appraisal's not done, they would get the credit back.
Yeah, or it would be applied to the next property.
Okay.
If during the inspection period they decide they want to back out,
Mm-hmm.
and then the appraisal still hasn't been completed and you put a stop on the appraisal, that's fine.
There's a safety net, so if they're not comfortable.
Well, it's the inspection period
Yeah.
is the safety net.
Yeah.
I will tell you that some sellers are requiring that the appraisal get completed within the inspection period.
Yeah.
They have every right to do that.
Yeah, I would agree.
Then, they wouldn't get any money back.
Mm-hmm.
Once the appraisal's done, the appraisal's done. If it's FHA or VA financing, the appraisal sticks with the property for 90 days. So if we're negotiating and we come to agreement at $280,000, but the property appraises for $250,000, and I'm an FHA buyer, that FHA appraisal sticks with the property for 90 days. So if a new FHA buyer comes to that property and tries to pay $380 or $280, the FHA is going to say, I'm sorry, we already have an appraisal of $250, it's not going to happen.
So they're, yeah.
So a seller has to determine if it's likely to go FHA or VA, and they've already had one appraisal. When they get that appraisal and they find out it's low, are they going to negotiate, or are they going to try and eliminate FHA or VA from their litany of
And they
accept-
can't get a second opinion.
When an appraisal comes in low, so it's a good point. So when an appraisal comes in low, what are our options? So the problem is we have a low appraisal. What are our options?
you can negotiate.
Okay, so when you say negotiate, what are we talking about?
Agree on a lower price.
Okay, so the buyer and the seller can agree to the appraised value, right?
Yeah.
Or a buyer and a seller can agree to split the difference in some way,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't have to be 50-50, it's whatever percentage they agree to. So, what else?
Second opinion.
Okay, second opinion. Good point about second opinion. Second opinion. Here's the deal. Even if both the buyer and the seller believe that the appraisal is a bad appraisal,
Mm-hmm.
and they want to get a second one, the lender has to agree to accept a second one.
Okay.
So we've had a lender send us a full-on letter that says, 2 pages, this is why we are not accepting the second appraisal.
Wow.
If you have one performed, good for you,
Mm-hmm.
but we're sticking with the appraisal we have.
Wow.
Yeah. So,
The second opinion was recommended by our lender
Great.
in our situation, but we didn't have time. It was for a refinance, though.
okay. Yeah. Okay. Completely different.
Okay.
Buying, selling, the lender has to agree to it.
Okay.
And most times these days, they're not agreeing to a second appraisal.
Mm.
Another option,
I don't know.
you can walk away.
Oh, well, yeah, there's that.
Yeah. So we can agree to terminate.
Mm-hmm.
So the seller can come down to the appraised value. The buyer and seller can agree to split the difference. We can basically try and get a second opinion or get another appraisal. You can walk away.
Mm-hmm.
Those are pretty much it
Okay.
on a low appraisal. What else? Okay. And then the seller is also responsible for their own courier fees.
Okay.
Please note that under item E, so of course, in here, item B, the real estate commission, the broker transaction fee pursuant to the listing agreement, that tells you that the seller's already gonna pay that. However, we don't outline that in here because that's an agreement between the brokerage and the seller.
Where is that?
Line 276.
Okay.
So we don't have it as a checkbox because that's an agreement between them. This is between the buyer and the seller. That statement is between the brokerage and the seller.
Okay.
Condominium homeowners association estoppel letters would be the responsibility of the seller. That's just saying that the seller has made their payments and is up to date on their homeowners association or condo fees. Seller is responsible for all the charges required by the lender that the buyer cannot pay. Right now, I can't think of any expense that a buyer cannot pay that a seller would have to pay. The seller, so right now, it's not as common for a buyer to request that a seller help them with their closing costs, just because the market is so crazy. So that's another term or condition that would be a contingency. If I say, will you help me with my closing costs? And you have another offer that's not asking you, you're gonna look at your net and say, well, I'm not gonna help you. I've got these people over here that aren't asking for
Mm-hmm.
that. Or you're asking for that, but that's not something I'm willing to do. So, a buyer can ask for assistance. Here's the deal. If a buyer asks for assistance and the seller agrees to help pay the costs, the seller is only obligated to pay for those costs that are checked here. Why is that important to understand? Because there are realtors who were trained back when I was first trained that said, if you're asking the seller to pay something towards the buyer's expenses, you don't check anything up there, and the seller just gives the money and the title company decides which expenses it goes to. And the buyer pays whatever's left over. And it came to a point where like, no, that's not right. That's leaving it open-ended for the seller. That's not fair.
Mhm.
And the buyer has no idea what they're gonna be paying.
Right.
So you can't do that. So it became, okay, look, fill this out as if the buyer's paying their costs and the seller's paying their costs. And then if you ask them here under other, you say under other, seller to contribute $3,000 to the buyer's closing costs, then the seller knows they're only going to be responsible for things that are checked up in paragraph 7A or those items identified in 7B, C, and D. Right?
Okay.
And when we say closing costs include prepaids. Are you familiar with the difference?
No, not really.
Okay. So closing costs are the things that I have to pay to get the property closed, whether it's the recording fees, the intangible tax, these things. Prepaids are when I'm going to finance my property and I'm going to make payments. My payment includes principal, interest, taxes, insurance, and any mortgage insurance premium or HOA or CDD fees. Prepaids, in other words, when I close today, May, whatever it is, 25th, 26th, May 26th, when I close today, my insurance is not going to be due for another year. So to ensure that I have enough money to cover my insurance bill when it comes, prepaids are identified from the lender or the servicer of the lender to say, you need to set up your escrow account and we need money in your escrow account because when the bills come, we have to pay them. And if you start now, you're not going to have enough money in there when the bill comes again, especially something like taxes.
Right.
Right now, they usually collect 6 months of the taxes, and then you pay into it, and then when your bill comes, they pay your bill. They have enough money to pay your bill. So prepaids are setting up the escrow account, putting money in there, so that when the bill comes, based on the money that's in there and the payments you make every month, they have enough money to pay the bills for you.
Right.
So prepaids set up your escrow account. Closing costs include prepaids. Mortgage payments, so the seller's responsible for all mortgage payments, condominium homeowners association fees. You have to remind people, you still have to make your payment until we close.
Yeah.
The property assessed clean energy, this is PACE, this is the financing of energy efficient improvements to the property. Most often roof type items, solar panels, generators, that type of thing. This is where people are going around knocking on doors. Hi, do you want to get a break in your taxes? You have this $15,000 item. You don't have to pay for it now. You can pay for it when your house sells. And the people who were taking on that responsibility didn't read the fine print indicating, oh, there's 20% interest every month, and that accumulates. Excuse me. We've had a couple of instances where the house has gone from a traditional sale to a short sale because of the money that was owed.
Like the solar. Yeah, it was seeming so scammy, all the advertisements, get this for free,
Exactly. Public body special assessment. So the seller either agrees to pay the public body special assessment in full prior to closing, or the buyer understands that they're going to have to pay the installments that come after closing. A public body special assessment is not a CDD and it is not a homeowners association. Public body special assessment would be, say this is our street. You, Jesse, and I live on this street, and it's a dirt road. Now we want to have it paved. Well, it's a private street. So we may each be assessed $10,000 to pave that road. But the company or the city that's going to do it, the entity that's going to do it, has said, look, you can pay us the $10,000 over 5 years. Now we're in the middle of that 5 years and I'm selling my house. Who's going to pay the rest of it? Me or the buyer? So we just have to disclose that here. But a public body special assessment is not homeowners association or CBDs. Prorations, everybody's responsible for paying for the time that they live there. So anything that's paid over time, you're responsible for paying for it for the time that you've lived there. So taxes, remember how taxes work?
In arrear.
In arrears.
Yeah.
Right. So when does the lien get put onto the property for taxes?
December 31st. Or, right?
January 1st.
January 1st, okay.
Yeah, so you're you're right there. So this is the lien January 1, let's say at 2023, there's a lien placed on every single property. Every single property. But because they're paid in arrears, the bill comes out in November, right? And then in December, if you pay in November, it's a 4% discount. If it's December it's a 3% discount, January, February, March it's due, blah, blah, blah. Right? So if I sell here, the bill hasn't come out, but I'm still responsible for the time that I've lived there.
Right.
And then the buyer is responsible for paying the bill when it comes.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make
And the title company is one who will put that down, or is that us to do this?
Nope, the title company will evaluate the taxes due, and they're at closing there will be an item that is signed that both buyer and seller agree that the amount of taxes that are being established or credited and debited are based on an estimate, and if the estimate is greatly different, the buyer and the seller agree to talk and compensate whoever was at a loss.
Yeah.
But in addition to property taxes, of course, there's anything else that's prorated. So rents, but remember, rents are paid in advance. So if I'm collecting the rent, if I've collected the rent and I close in the middle of the month, I have to give the buyer a credit for the time that I've owned the property.
Right.
Yes, for the time I've owned the property. The other thing people don't think about are security deposits. Security deposits have to be credited. They're not even the landlord's money.
Right.
So it has to be credited. If you're working with an investor, and I'm sure you're working with wise investors, I always counsel investors, please don't ask for a credit of your security deposit. Please have the seller cut you a check for the security deposit, because what ends up happening oftentimes, now, people who have a bunch of different properties probably aren't as worried about it. However, I still worry about it for them. They forget that when the closing statement comes, if the security deposit was $2,000, the money they're bringing to closing is $2,000 less than they expected because of the security deposit.
Yeah.
They have to take and now add $2,000 to their account that holds security deposits. Otherwise, when that tenant moves out and they're confused about where that $2,000 is, or forgot, like you forgot about the $20, then they're coming to you going, nobody ever gave me the money. And you're like pulling out the closing statement going, oh, here's your credit for $2,000. I'm sorry you didn't put it into your account.
Yeah.
But you got it.
Yeah.
So I usually caution them, at least that reminds them, I better put whatever the money is that I need. No, go ahead and give me the credit. I'll go ahead and deposit an additional amount of money into the account.
Yeah. And that goes into the tenant's rates as well, because they can't be commingled with any other funds in their account.
The tenants.
The tenant's security deposit.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So it'd be whatever account that I have set up to hold security deposits.
Right.
I can hold more than one security deposit
Yeah.
in an account. It just can't be commingled with my stuff.
Right.
Default. So if the buyer defaults, so this is the bad stuff, the buyer defaults or the seller defaults. If the buyer defaults into this agreement, including failure to pay binder deposits, remember that. We talked about binder deposits yesterday and how important it is that if you're taking the binder deposit to the title company or the attorney, you need to make sure it's there in a timely manner. Otherwise, it's a default. If I've agreed to pay $10,000 as a binder, but I'm going to do $5,000 now and $5,000 later, if I default on that first one, the seller can ask for all $10,000. So they're agreed. If failure to pay all binder deposits within the time specified, all binder deposits paid and agreed to be paid. After deduction of unpaid closing costs, except inspections, credit reports, and appraisal fees, which shall be the buyer's sole responsibility. So those items will always be the buyer's responsibility.
Yeah.
Always. They won't come out of the binder deposit. It's not something the seller can claim. Those are always the buyer's responsibility. But if I've agreed to pay 5 and 5 and I default on the 5, the seller can now say, I want all 10. I want the 5 you deposit, but I need the other 5 that you agreed to do. So they can keep those monies as liquidated damages, and the buyer and seller will then be relieved of all obligations. If the seller defaults into this agreement, all loan and sale processing costs and closing costs incurred, whether the same were to be paid by the buyer or the seller, would be the responsibility of the seller. So if the seller defaults, the seller doesn't do what they were supposed to do, then they have to pay back the buyer. And the buyer may either, 1, seek specific performance. Are you familiar with that?
I wouldn't know of an example.
So, if a seller defaults, and the buyer gets their binder back, or the buyer elects not to get their binder back, they can seek specific performance, or they can sue for the seller to require the seller to perform on the contract they executed. So if the seller defaults, it doesn't mean they can still get away scot-free. A buyer could say, I get it, you defaulted, but here's the deal, you can't get out of the contract. I'm going to sue you to enforce the contract.
To have them buy the house.
Yeah, to have them sell the buyer the house.
Uh-huh.
Force them to
Yeah.
sell the buyer the house. So, but since it's a legal matter, can they sell the house while they're going through the legal matter?
Not until it's closed. Not until it's dissolved.
Not until the suit's resolved.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and this can take 2 or 3 years
Mm-hmm.
for seeking specific performance. So a seller can't sell while you're suing them to enforce a contract.
Yeah.
Why? Because the house is what you're suing over.
Yeah.
So they're stuck.
Yeah.
They gotta stay there, or they gotta sell you the house for what they agreed to sell you to you
I feel like that would be a really bad image for you as a realtor to have that happen to your seller.
for. It's not so bad for you because it doesn't happen. You're not involved.
Right.
If
If the word gets out that my realtor let this happen or guided me to have this happen, that would be
you always have to be concerned about that.
yeah.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. So they can seek specific performance, or they can agree just to get their binder back and walk away. All binder deposits retained by the seller as liquidated damage will be distributed pursuant to the terms of the listing agreement. The listing agreement does state that we as the brokerage have the right to keep 50% of any liquidated damages. If we ever elect to do that, we have never elected to take money from a seller who's received liquidated damages. If we were to elect to, we would have to evaluate the situation and determine if there were damages that we can't recover. Then you would get your split on whatever we kept.
Like, can you give me an example of when that would happen?
When we would go ahead and
Mm-hmm.
so if a buyer defaults and the seller's entitled to their binder deposit, that money, so it's $5,000. So the seller's entitled to that $5,000. Our listing agreement says if you get money, we're entitled to 50%.
Okay.
We have to say we want 50%. So when would we ever say that we want 50%? We might not say we want 50%. We might say we want a specific amount, but we might do that if the seller is now going to list with someone else, and we have expenses. You have expenses that aren't going to be covered. We may lay a claim to a portion of those funds, or we may lay a claim to as much as 50%.
Okay.
Whatever we lay a claim to, you're entitled to your split
Okay.
once the expenses are covered.
Mm-hmm.
If the seller if the seller, so the buyer can seek specific performance. Did we do the buyer? Yeah, so if the buyer defaults, the seller can keep the money. If the seller defaults, the buyer can sue for specific performance or get their binder back and walk away. If it's non-default, in other words, nobody did anything wrong, so the buyer wants to get out during the inspection period. The seller says they're not going to do repairs, and the buyer wants repairs. He doesn't want credit. Then, if everybody's just agreeing to walk away, so if it's non-default and the buyer's not going to continue forward, the buyer elects not to continue forward, then they're responsible for all of their fees. They pay what they were supposed to pay, they get their binder back, and everybody walks away.
Mm-hmm.
If the seller defaults or is in non-default or decides not to move forward, but based on the term of the contract, then all loan and sale processing costs, whether they would be the same that are paid by the buyer or the seller, will be the responsibility of the seller. Okay? And the buyer will be entitled to the return of their binder deposit. This will include transaction not closing because the seller elects not to pay the amount in excess of amounts in paragraph 15. We're on paragraph 11. Paragraph 15 talks about what happens if something happens to the house during the contract period. How do we deal with that? Which is called casualty, loss, or damage. Or because the seller cannot deliver marketable title, or is unable to cure any association or permitting costs, but shall not include failure to appraise or termination pursuant to paragraph 2. So look, if everybody is like, we just can't move forward, and everybody usually covers their own costs and we walk away.
Mm-hmm.
If everybody's like, wait a minute, you defaulted, then we have to figure out which is the appropriate means of resolution. If there is a dispute, we talked about the types of resolution that would be available if the money is held with a brokerage. Not the same here. So what we talked a little bit about yesterday is when the money is held with the title company or attorney, and it will always be, it is currently always, that happens, then you need to make sure you know what the means of resolution are established by that title company or attorney. Ask for it in writing. So these two paragraphs don't apply to us. What applies to us is make sure you ask the right questions, ask them of the title company or attorney. Property disclosure, I mentioned there's only one place in this that I recommend you leave things blank. When you're filling this out, most likely you have not had a home inspection yet. If you have, like if you did an inspection or requested an inspection prior to offering, then you would have information. But in most cases, we don't have a lot of information about the property other than the seller's disclosure before we ever fill out an offer. But if you have information, or if you've seen something in the house that you want to have addressed, this is where you would put it. So the seller represents the seller has no knowledge of facts materially affecting the value of the property other than those the buyer can readily observe, except. So the seller would have had to tell us that this is a material fact. So maybe they had that one buyer, and the seller requested the report when the buyer backed out, and there was something that materially affected the value of the house on that report, but they chose not to fix it. They would have to disclose it. They would disclose it in MLS. The buyer would, you on behalf of the buyer would write it into here. The seller represents the seller has no knowledge of any improvements or repairs made to the property, which were made without permits. You've already got this. The seller further represents that the property is not now and will not be prior to the date of closing, subject to municipal lien or county code. Sometimes the seller doesn't know this, but the seller is supposed to say that. And unless it's disclosed in MLS, customarily in private remarks, or in a document attached to the listing in MLS, you won't know any of these. So I either recommend leave these blank, put none known at this time if you feel the need to fill something in. Completely acceptable. In addition to any conditions of the home, we are required to disclose to buyers the following items. 1, if a buyer wants to have the home rated for energy efficiency, they have every right to do so. Radon gas is a naturally occurring item, not very frequently here in Florida, North Florida, more so mid-state, maybe downstate, but it's a naturally occurring item. It could potentially exist. If you want to test for it, great, you have every right to do it. When should they do it?
During the inspection
During the
period.
inspection period. Flood zone is going to come with the survey automatically. Community development district, if it is in a CDD, it's usually a planned unit development of some sort, we do need the CDD disclosure. Customarily, listing agents will attach an executed CDD addendum with the seller's signatures to the listing. So all you
Where did the seller's agent get that from? They contact?
where does the seller agent get, I'm sorry, what?
Where does the seller get the disclosure of the CDD?
So if you were listing a property and you knew that the house was in a CDD, there is a form called a CDD disclosure, a community development district disclosure. It's a form that you would then include in your listing package.
So it's just a form, it's not that, because you need to provide it to the buyers. So how do you don't?
So if I'm listing the house and I'm meeting with Jessie and her house is in a CDD, when I go to list the house, one of the pieces of paper that I'm going to have her acknowledge and complete, in addition to the listing agreement, is a CDD disclosure. She's going to execute it with the proper information, what the cost, the annual cost is of the CDD, and then I'm going to take that CDD disclosure with her signature on it, and I'm going to upload it into MLS, so that when you come with a buyer, you can pull that one down, see that it's been executed by the buyer, and have your customer sign it acknowledging that fee.
And I always worry about, because my memory is never very good personally, So if her numbers were off unintentionally, that would cause problems down the road if she was wrong.
It could potentially cause a problem.
Yeah.
It would be something that would be disclosed prior to closing as to what the amount is.
Okay.
But you as the listing agent should probably check the county tax records, because within the county tax records it identifies the company that is required to collect the CDD fee and the amount.
Okay.
Most likely, when you are listing a house, if you ask them for a copy of their tax bill, you'll see exactly what the amount is.
Okay.
It should be identified on the tax bill.
Okay. I'm always planning in advance for. I feel like we need to double check numbers.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I agree. So that's why we tell you should ask for a deed, just to make sure who's on it.
Mm-hmm.
You should ask for a copy of their tax bill, their
Okay.
most recent tax bill, because all of these things help you fill out your purchase and sale, your listing agreement. We're really talking more listing right now. Your listing agreement, it helps you acknowledge whether you need to have an HOA disclosure or a CDD disclosure. It acknowledges or helps you figure out if there are other disclosures you need, and then you also provide them, of course, with the seller's disclosure, seller's property disclosure.
So you just ask for the tax bill and a deed.
Most likely, yeah,
Yeah.
that should be about it.
Okay.
We are required to let people know about mold. It's Florida, really?
Yeah. Right.
It's a little human.
Yeah.
If they are in an airport zone, we have to let them know about noise within an airport zone. This includes all small, medium, and large. So Craig Field, Airlawn, NAS Jax, Mayport, Cecil. We have to disclose if they're within a certain radius of those airports, all airports.
Okay.
Historic districts, we argue about this back and forth. We have 5 nationally recognized historic districts in our market. We have 2 of the largest in the US, and we have the greatest number of nationally recognized districts of any one city in the US. So we're pretty cool when it comes to historic districts. Disclosure for historic districts must be for nationally recognized historic districts. So for example, St. Nicholas, historic area, not nationally recognized. You don't have to disclose that it's in a historic district because there are no restrictions to what you do in St. Nicholas. However, Avondale, you have to. So we argue back and forth on whether this should say nationally recognized historic districts or not, but it truly is only nationally recognized historic districts. Are there any other disclosures? The buyer should exercise any due diligence that they want. Please do not talk about crime. Please do not talk about sexual offenders. Please do not talk about any of those other things. Send them to the websites. The challenge with the websites, of course, is if you look up 32210, it's a very large zip code, and there are sections of it that have high,
They're not representative of the whole.
well, yeah, an area like Ortega is probably not representative, or the zip code is not representative of the microcosm, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So just let them do their own research.
Yeah.
If they have questions, just send them there.
Yeah.
Broker notice, this is one of our little hold harmlesses. Buyer and the seller acknowledge and agree that neither the listing nor the selling broker warrants the condition, size, or square footage of the property, and neither is liable to the buyer or the seller in any manner whatsoever for losses, damages, claims, suits, costs regarding the same. The buyer and seller hereby release and hold harmless said brokers and their licensees from any losses, damages, claims, suits, and costs arising out of or occurring with respect to the condition, size, or square footage of the property. Here's the deal. Those numbers will be disclosed in MLS, they'll be in the tax records, and they'll be on the appraisal. It is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just one of those other disclosures for us saying, look, we try our best, but you need to give as much information as you can to make you happy.
Right.
Possession will be given at closing for the buyer or within a certain number of days before or after closing. Please note, if a buyer is moving in prior to closing or a seller stays after closing, there should be a document that can be executed by an attorney. The FAR bar documents, which of course you have access to because you're licensed in the state of Florida, they do have a post-licensing and pre-licensing agreement. We do not recommend the use of either of those. The closing attorney or title company that you're using to close the property will most likely provide those at no cost. So get one of them to do it. The seller shall sweep the property clean, whatever, very subjective.
Yeah.
The seller represents that there are no parties in possession, or the buyer understands that the property is available for rent or rental. Just a disclosure so that the buyer knows what the condition is. This way, should the buyer want to move into the property as their primary residence, the realtor working with the buyer would then put a caveat in that all tenants must be out prior to closing. And then it's the seller's responsibility to negotiate the lease with the tenant, not the buyer's.
Okay.
Remember, if a property is rented, the lease goes with the property, not with the seller.
Right.
So,
And let's say, going back to like the broom swept condition, if there's still belongings in there, they didn't it looks like they didn't finish moving, or they just left junk or something like that, what would you, and say the buyer is upset, what would you do?
well, I would tell the buyer that you now have some furniture if it's after closing.
Mhm.
If it's before closing, we can hold up closing until those items are removed. So you have that choice. You can hold up closing and get the items removed, or turn to the buyer to get those items removed, or we can go ahead and close and you can take responsibility for them.
Okay.
Your choice.
Interesting. We closed in Indiana, primary residence, and the seller was the child of the deceased family members, and didn't know it was a closing day, and so he didn't get out some of his things, and then so he was wanting to occupy the property until he got out when we were ready moving that day. It was very weird, because he was also a very sketchy man. It was very strange. Weird with my kids, I did not like it. So we were like, we want you away, and so I called my realtor. I'm like, I don't even want to talk to him. He's just very strange. So it was very weird, and then he took like 2 days to get everything out. And the only reason
And you had already closed?
we had already closed, yeah. But then I also, looking back at the realtor did the walkthrough. He was like, yeah, I noticed that, he left a few things. You didn't look in the closets. But I see that he left like a antique sewing machine. I'd love to have that if you don't want it. And so she let me know that there were some things, but maybe we should have clarified that it wasn't empty.
Well, I mean, if you're doing a walkthrough before closing, that's when you have to make the decision. Am I going to close?
I wasn't there.
Yeah, oh,
Yeah.
okay, so are we going to close knowing that there are things in the house?
Mm-hmm.
Or are we not going to close?
Did you tell her my story?
Which one?
So I closed, so my horse died the morning
Oh.
that I closed on my house. So I couldn't go do the final walkthrough because I was burying my horse.
Mm-hmm.
And
Oh,
the
sure.
sellers left like the boat in the garage, left so much crap at my house. And then they thought they could just come to my house whenever they wanted. That they could just keep some keys and they could just come and get the rest of their stuff whenever they wanted.
Wow.
Yeah. I almost had to get a lawyer involved.
Yeah. That's so weird. Yeah.
Living.
Jesse specializes in horse properties.
It's
I
you.
love that.
Yes. So interesting things happen all the time.
We moved here from Indiana and had miniature horses and
Oh, cute.
little farm, like a hobby farm, and we came here and we were like, are we either going to start investing in Airbnbs, which is the road we decided to take, or we're going to open up a stable. And so that was very close, but
That's
yeah, we
where in
loved it.
Indiana were you?
We were in Valparaiso.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, by Lake Michigan there.
Okay. Yeah, my mom's from Kalamazoo is in like on the border, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got a lot of family in Indiana. Up,
Do you?
like right on that area.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
But yes.
Anyway.
So in that case, you probably would have had to get a lawyer. Or if, for example, in your case, if the guy was staying,
Mhm.
then you would have to evict him.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I didn't even think about that. Yeah. Fortunately, it all worked out. in
Okay,
time,
good.
But
You had someone try and stay.
yeah, and he didn't seem mentally stable or something. Yeah.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Most of them aren't. No.
Yeah.
I ended up building a fence because the people that were sellers were my neighbors.
Oh
So I built
no. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Oh wow. Do you still live there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Ongoing problems or no?
There were, but they seem to have tapered down.
Good.
Yeah. I would like look out my back window and they'd be like driving their golf cart around my property.
That's the problem in the rural area. They always try and fight over. We had 10 acres, and these people were just all of their business.
Yeah, it's weird.
See, so I'm not lying, first of all.
I didn't catch what I just heard. If people leave stuff there.
Yeah. So, yeah. So I am
Anyway.
telling you the truth. See, she
Yeah.
Anyway, keep going.
But yeah, it would become yours. So
Yeah.
the items there become yours. So you never had. I mean, he never, from the time of closing, never had the right to be on your property.
Yeah.
So anything that was left was left. It's no longer his.
Yeah.
So
Crazy.
frightening.
I should have gotten a boat,
I know. That's what we don't tell
What you
them.
should have done is you should have gone ahead and titled the boat in your name.
right? In the toolbox, all those fun things. They have so
And
much.
you like
They have good
tools.
stuff.
Yeah.
I have so many. I need a toolbox.
Right.
I've got a big red rolling one.
Do you? I need. That's what I need. Do you want to sell yours?
It's full of tools.
Do
Even
you want to
better.
sell it?
Not yet. I still like the tools.
Darn.
So the seller either represents that there are no parties in, so it becomes the buyer's property. And remember, the day of closing belongs to the buyer. So whatever happens, that's the day we're looking at. The buyer is entitled to a copy of all current leases and rent rolls. So here's the deal. When you go under contract, if it's an investment property, and there's a tenant in there, within 5 days of acceptance, the buyer is entitled to a copy of all leases and rent rolls. You have to give those to them. And then they get the originals at closing. Just like the seller is supposed to provide a copy of receipts from repairs that have been completed, once the repairs are completed, and then they're supposed to provide those receipts, the real ones, at closing. I can't tell you how often that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But don't let that be the norm for you.
Mhm.
No, that's what you can do. I showed up at closing with a stack of receipts from a recent closing. I have some friends of mine, and I showed up at closing with a stack of receipts, and the attorney was like, "What is all that?" And I said, "Well, it's the receipts from everything that was done between contract and closing." He goes, "I can't believe it. Nobody ever brings those."
Yeah.
I said, "Well, it's what we're supposed to do."
Yeah.
So anyway, interesting. Of course, 437, if neither box is marked, then the buyer will be given possession at closing. So even when you forget to do something, we try and fill it in for you. Casualty, loss, or damage. This is the paragraph that we referenced earlier. The way that casualty, loss, or damage, remember we talked about equitable title? So a buyer has vested interest in the property once they go under contract. So if something happens to that property, they need to be informed. So the breaking point in our documents is 3% of the purchase price. So if something happens to the property and it's less than 3%, the value of what occurred or the damage that occurred to fix it is less than 3% of the purchase price, then the seller is obligated to fix it. $400,000 house. Pipe breaks in the bathroom. Water overflows. Ruins the floor. Floor has to be replaced. Vanity has to be replaced. $5,000. $400,000, 3%, $12,000. $5,000 to make the repairs, put it back the way that it was. The seller's already obligated. If it's more than 3% of the value of the property, then the buyer and seller have an opportunity to talk about it and negotiate. So if it's more than 3%, then the seller has to either agree to make the change, and the buyer and seller have to agree with that. The buyer could potentially walk away if the seller does not want to make those changes, or the buyer could go ahead and take the property with those issues, but they get the insurance money and any amount equal to the deductible. So if fire in the kitchen is destroyed, it's going to cost $80,000 to fix the kitchen. The buyer and seller then say, okay, well, the seller says, I'll put it back to the way it was. I'll file my claim. I'll get my money. I'll put it back to the way that it was. Buyer says, okay, fine. So now we extend the time for closing. We figure out how long it's going to take. We make all the necessary adjustments, and they move forward and fix the kitchen. Or buyer and seller can say, seller says, okay, I'll make the repairs, I'll fix the kitchen. Buyer could say, here's what we're going to do. We were going to redo the kitchen anyway. So here's what we're going to do. We'll design the kitchen like we wanted. You take the insurance money and put it towards that. We'll pay the difference between what your insurance costs and what it's going to cost to make the kitchen the way that we want it. Or they could say, don't do anything. We're going to redo it anyway. We agree to take it in its as-is condition, and you just give us the insurance money and the deductible, and we'll put that towards what we were going to spend.
Mm-hmm.
So it becomes a lot of negotiation. Even on the lower amounts, it becomes a negotiation. Wait a minute, we were going to change the vanity and floor out too. If it's $5,000 to put it back the way that it was, it's going to cost $8,000 to do what we want to do. We'll pay the $3,000 and get it back the way that we want. You give us a credit for $5,000. You okay with that? So it's a real negotiation.
Mm-hmm.
The times that it's the hardest are when things happen like a house burns down.
Yeah.
So we had Murray Hill. We had a listing, went in MLS on Friday, went under contract on Sunday. We had a meeting on Tuesday. The agent showed up late to the meeting because at 1 o'clock in the morning he was called to come out to the house by the fire department.
Oh.
He went out to the house had been burnt, the house burned down.
Oh, my goodness.
Fortunately, nobody was there. Somebody had broken into the house, with meth or whatever, the thing you cook under the spoon or whatever, and burnt the house down. So all that was left was
Someone broke into the house and burned it down.
Mhm.
Oh man.
If it can happen, it will happen.
Yeah.
Well, here's the thing though. The house was under contract for $275. The buyers elected to walk away. The seller had an insurance policy for $320, I think. So she took the insurance money, cleared the house, raised the house, and then sold the lot. So she did okay. She
Yeah.
came out about almost close to $400,000, where she would have ended up with roughly $275.
There you go.
Not terrible.
Yeah.
Moved on,
Yeah.
and somebody's building a house there now.
How
Anyway,
coincidental that somebody started the house on fire after it just got under contract. Who made an offer? I want to know the suspects.
there's aspects in that, right?
Yeah.
Well, it was somebody who broke in who was cooking meth. is
Did
what
they
it
get
was.
arrested?
No, they ran, of course. House started on fire and they left. They just found some of the.
Was it boarded up or was it?
No.
No.
No, it was a beautiful house.
Really?
Absolutely beautiful, but the seller had already moved out. Had moved on to their next property. House was in great shape, beautiful. All that was left was the fireplace, the brick, and a circular staircase.
So they were on Zillow looking for empty houses to go to.
Hey, yeah, right. Well, probably not even. They probably just walked by it and saw that it was empty and went in. The house next to me burned down.
Really?
Yeah, and they're still trying to get it. I'm sorry, in Avondale. So they're trying to get. Well, shoot, they were at City Hall last night, so I don't know where they're at with it now. But because it's nationally recognized historic district, the city of Jacksonville Historic has to agree to demolish the house rather than require it to be rebuilt. It's ridiculous because the house is in terrible shape and it's been over 6 months, 7 months. So of course rain and elements and it just keeps falling in on itself.
Wow.
So anyway, it's not pretty.
No.
And I love that street because it's only 16 houses. So I reached out to the woman whose house it was. I'm like, look, we'll buy the lot. We'll build our house back on there because I'm now disappointed I ever sold the house. But anyway, whatever. Can't go back.
Yeah.
Move forward. Paragraph 16 is personal property. So any of the items that are on lines 455 through 462 are items that if they are in the home. Hey there, how are you? So the items on 455 to 462, if the items are in the home, they're intended to stay with the home. You don't have to cross things out. So if it's not a cooktop, you don't have to cross off cooktop. It's just if it's there, then it stays. Things that you kind of watch for are things like audiovisual system wiring. Just so for clarification, that's the wiring that's in the wall. If I'm hooking up my speakers by stringing wire through the house, that wiring doesn't stay. It's the wiring that's in the wall or the wiring that's in the ceiling. That stays. Do the speakers attach to that stay? It depends. If it's a speaker attached to a bracket, that's not intended to stay. If it's a speaker that's inset into the wall or the ceiling, that's intended to stay.
Unless otherwise specified.
Unless otherwise specified, exactly. Things that we also get hooked up on are, we gotta watch for smart things, smart outlets. People tend to take them because they're expensive. So just like take them out of the wall, but don't put just a regular plug back in.
Doorbell, the Ring doorbells, people too.
Ring doorbells. Well, and see, Ring doorbells are just like spas. Some Ring doorbells are hardwired, so they would have to stay. Other Ring doorbells you don't have to hardwire, you just use the battery and you recharge the battery. Those would not be intended to stay.
See, I had a dispute with someone where the renter that was living there had hardwired a Ring doorbell into the home, and then they took it when I left. So I went, because they were, grumping about it. So I went to Home Depot and bought a doorbell for them and left it on the counter for the buyers that were not my buyers. And then the agent was like, "Oh, I just bought them a Ring doorbell for their closing present." I was like, "Well, then why did you have me go?
Right.
Why did you have me go buy one?"
But that's a good point, though. I mean, you'll probably buy something in your career. That was generous of her to do that when it wasn't her buyer. But that tenant was also probably in violation of their lease
Yeah.
by hardwiring an item rather than
Right.
using the battery. Right. So things that you have to look for. But that same example does apply to spas. So with hot tubs, if it's hardwired, it stays. If it's a plug-in, it's not included. So you have to know whether it's supposed to or not supposed to.
Interesting.
And just clarify on that one.
Yeah. If you want keyless entry, so the like she's talking about with the keyless entry door things, which you're probably familiar with.
Oh yeah.
Light fixtures and bulbs. Bulbs has come up over in the last 5 years because everybody's changing over to LED bulbs and they're expensive, so they clear out the bulbs. And now the buyer walks in and turns on the light and there's nothing to go on. So we say light fixtures and bulbs. So
To remain.
To remain.
Yeah.
If it's attached. So if your seller, one of the things we have to ask our seller when we're listing a house is, "Oh, have you changed out all your bulbs? Are you excited? Is that something that's important to you? Okay, clear out those bulbs and go down to the Dollar Tree and buy your $1.50 bulbs and put them in everywhere, because the expectation is the fixture will light up
Yeah.
when we flip the switch. All window treatments, this is a little misleading sometimes or confusing for people. Just know if it's a window treatment, it stays. So the rods, the drapes, they're all intended to stay.
I thought the rods
Blinds,
only. not
shutters.
Like if it was curtains or something, I didn't think that they would stay.
All drapery, hardware, all window treatments and coverings.
I'd write that out because my sister handmade all my
Oh yeah.
drapes.
Yeah, so you would exclude them. And that's what we do. We can, down here. Items specifically excluded. This can be a tough discussion with your seller because, for example, I might say to Jesse, they are beautiful and they're fantastic, but I'm going to tell you, the buyer's probably going to want them. So we can exclude them, but I would really recommend that you replace them prior to closing.
I just take them down before the photos and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, take them down, period. Don't even put them back up after photos, because the minute they see it there,
They're gonna want it.
they're going to want it. Just like with any fixture. If you're touring a house, oh my gosh, we got that fixture when we were in, Ireland, it's Waterford, we're so excited, it means so much to us. You can keep it? Yes, take it down.
Yeah.
Yeah, on my kitchen one too. I
Yeah.
have this orange and yellow, stained glass lamp thing.
They're very cool.
Yeah.
If I sell my house, the buyers are getting nothing. They're getting the door. They're getting the doors.
They're getting wires in the ceiling and a credit to Home Depot.
There you go.
Otherwise, you just identify those items that the buyer would like. Please remember, you can get this list or you can refer to this list from MLS. In MLS, the listing associate should tell you what the seller intends on leaving. If this list matches what the seller intends on leaving, great. If it doesn't match what the seller intends on leaving, in other words, they don't intend on leaving the wine cooler and now you're asking for it, now you've added another contingency to the contract. So it's another negotiation item. Right? Please also use the 469 where you say other. If there's nothing else that you want to make sure stays, or even if there is, please use this section to describe any of the personal items that you think could be in jeopardy, most specifically refrigerators. We seem to have the greatest trouble with refrigerators. So here I would say, if the refrigerator that the buyer is expecting to stay is the LG stainless side-by-side with water and ice and door, and I don't have the model number, I might go ahead and say stainless side-by-side LG refrigerator with water, ice, and door, so that everybody knows that's the one the buyers want, it's the one that's there now, that's the one they expect. Because sometimes when people get pissy back and forth after they're under contract, they do things. And refrigerators are easy to remove. And we've had, all of a sudden the avocado green refrigerator that was in the garage ends up in the kitchen. So you gotta watch those things.
Interesting.
Making
Good
sure
point.
it's all there. So anything that's easily movable, not a dishwasher, not a stove, but if it's easily movable or removable. Although we would have, I don't know if I told you this, we had a house that sold, this cute house, single story in Avondale, back on the back of a little park, and had this cool path that walked up to these two big, beautiful sago palms, right, that flanked either side of the walkway.
They took the palms.
Took the palms. Buyer got to the house after closing, and the sago palms are gone.
That was a pain to dig up too.
Hi, and they did it during closing.
Oh my god.
After the final
After
walkthrough.
walkthrough.
Ooh, that's not cool.
So we literally got online and went, okay, what would it cost for a sago palm this size? Actually,
$1,000 for two of them.
We called the, this was 100 years ago, so there was no internet. There was no phones either. Anyway, we went to the...
You sent a pigeon carrier.
We went to the little, very expensive garden shop right there on Herschel and said, how much would you think of? He's like $3,000. I'm like, ooh,
For one.
oh my gosh, for one. So we called the attorney and we're like, hi, this is what's happened. So the buyer is willing to take a $6,000 credit or $6,000 cash and or return the sago palms that night. Sago palms.
Well, hopefully they survived that though.
Yeah, they did.
They did.
Which was good.
I have
Fortunately,
one
they
that someone can just take if they want to come dig it up out front of my house.
that's a big sago palm.
It's massive. I hate it.
That's gonna be tough.
I'd be thrilled if someone left me an avocado green fridge though. I'd be like, yes.
Avocado what?
An avocado green fridge. I'd be like, that's the one I
That's
want.
the one you wanted. There were some really cool retro ones over at Home Depot or Lowe's, one of the two.
Was there?
I don't remember if they were red or white. We're at paragraph 17, which is our additional catch-all paragraph. So if there are any addenda that are required, for example, if it is a condo, you would be required to have the condo writer. If the home is in an HOA or a CDD, you have to have both of those, additional documents, and they both must be executed by all parties. The one that I like to remind people of is lead-based paint. If a house is built before 1978, it's a lead-based paint disclosure is required by law. You need to know how to fill those out. Because if we get audited, the cost for any error on a lead-based paint disclosure is $5,000 per error up to a maximum of $45,000.
Wow.
It is a one-page document. So if you fill it out incorrectly, you'll get a bill from us.
What's difficult about, or where's the errors taking place in that one-page document?
People don't read it. It's not difficult.
Yeah.
The seller signs it
Mhm.
at time of listing, or should, and acknowledges the pieces, and then the buyer acknowledges the responses.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward. You, the realtor on the listing side, have to acknowledge that you gave them the brochure. They have to acknowledge the receipts. Kind of straightforward.
Yeah.
So anyway, so any of these that would be required. The other one, coastal construction control line. This applies to properties only on the ocean. It does not apply to properties on river or intracoastal. Only on the ocean. The deal with that is there is a coastal construction control line on the beach, a line that has been put, quote unquote, into the sand. You know, where construction cannot occur in front of that line. However, that line has moved over time or continues to move based on tides and based on evaluation by the, what's that group that puts in the docks? Anyway, that group. So if the house was built, and it was built when the coastal construction control line was here, but now it's here, if something happens to that house and you want to rebuild, you may have to build behind the coastal construction control line. So it would depend on the size of the lot, what was there, what the footprint was, and what your intentions are.
Yeah.
So the local city would have an impact on that. And out here at the beach, there are basically three different, there's Jacksonville Beach, Ponte Vedra, Atlantic Beach, so the local organization would have an influence on that. Atlantic Beach for. Otherwise, I think that, backup addendum, this is if your offer that you're writing is going into backup position.
Mhm.
This isn't uncommon these days, people writing backup offers, sitting in backup position. Continued marketing addendum. Continued marketing addendum relates to, so in MLS there are a variety of different status options. Have you been seeing those?
Say it again.
Different status options. So a house is in a different, house is classified as a particular status, or it's,
Like, can I have an example?
sure, active.
Oh, like that, yeah.
Yeah. So let's just kind of review them so we're kind of clear on all of them and what they mean too.
Mhm.
So we can go with A equals active. We're good with that one?
Yeah.
Available to sell it all day long, no problem, right? Have you seen others? Do you remember what some of the others you've seen?
Contingent accepting,
Okay.
backup offer.
So contingent and thank you. It isn't just contingent, it's contingent accepting backup offers. So contingent, accepting, backup. Please note, this does mean the property must be available for show.
Yeah.
Pending, you're probably seeing. Customarily, a property will go from active to contingent to pending. Cash will often go active to pending. If you don't want showings, you have to go active to pending. Obviously, there's sold when the property sells, closes, done. There's one called withdrawn.
It's taken off the market.
Okay, let's just clarify that. It's not available for showing. There's still an active listing agreement. So if I put a property into withdrawn status, that means it cannot be shown for 48 hours or more. No showings for 48 hours or more. That means that the sign must come out of the yard and the property must be moved into withdrawn status. Example, I have a child, we've all been exposed to COVID, we're staying quarantined for 5 days, I don't want any showings on my property. Well, that's more than 48 hours. So I would have to move from active to withdrawn for that period. And then back to active when it's all okay to come and show.
And I read that it couldn't be for more than, I think, 14 days, and that if you need an extension for 1 week, you have to ask.
Different.
Okay.
That's coming soon.
Oh, okay.
Coming soon, and there are two things that we want to be aware of. We'll go into greater detail when we talk about listings, but coming soon says no showings. You can have it for 14 days in coming soon. You may get a 7-day extension with MLS approval. So that's a coming soon, exactly. There are other pieces of this we'll talk more about when we talk about the listing agreement. There is X, which is expired, which means the seller intended to sell, but we didn't get that far, and the listing agreement expired. And then there's something called first right of refusal.
I'm gonna leave this on your desk.
Thank you. First right of refusal. So contingent taking backup, so back to the backup addendum, contingent taking backup says, okay, I still want to show my property, I'm under contract with someone, I'm looking forward to selling, but, you know, I've got a contract. I need to let you all know that. Now your buyer says, well, I still want to make an offer, I'll go into backup position 1. And so we go, great, we negotiate with the seller, they execute the contract as a backup in backup 1 position. No problem. Now your buyer sits out there. Is the first one gonna close? Is it not gonna close? I don't know, not really sure. Okay. Now you hear it closed, dang it, I didn't get it. All right, we'll move on to the next property. First right of refusal is slightly different. First right of refusal says, look, Mr. and Ms. Seller, I wanna buy your house. But I have a house to sell. So I want to negotiate with you, and you can continue to market your property. And if someone else makes you an offer and you agree to their terms and conditions, you just need to notify me, and I have to have a certain amount of time, usually 24 hours, to determine if I'm going to remove my contingency, selling my house or whatever it is, and go ahead and close with you, or I'll go away. So the neat thing about, the thing I like about first right of refusal, which is initiated by the continued marketing addendum, so that addendum means this in MLS. So the thing about it is then, well, what's the harm of going under contract with you? Because here's the deal, if someone else makes me a nice offer that I like, I'm just gonna tell you, you've either gotta close with me or gotta go bye-bye,
Yeah.
right?
And
So,
usually they probably can't close within 24 hours.
well, not close within 24
Yeah.
hours, remove the contingency, and then close,
Yeah.
based on the terms of the contract. But I kinda like this better than this,
Yeah.
because if my buyer's in backup position, they're just sitting there going, well, I don't know, do you think they're gonna close? I'm not really sure, maybe they'll close. Here it's like, you know what? I'm gonna either force them to close or I get the house. You know?
Right.
So the buyer has a more definitive timeline. The seller has an option with buyer 1 and can still market their property, see if they can do as well or possibly better.
So contingent accepting backup offers, is it just throwing your offer into the pool of possibly others and then picking from the best, or if they accept it, are you potential buyer number 2? Buyer number 2?
So the backup addendum identifies what position you are in. So we have had sellers take backup offers and take 3 backup offers. So you have someone in first position, second position, how far did you go?
3rd.
You were 3rd, or you
I
had a
was the
3rd?
listing, and I had, I think 4 cash offers,
Wow.
and the first one bailed immediately. We moved on to the next one. They went under contract and bailed like before they ever put their binder in, and then we went on the 3rd one, and that one closed.
Are these new?
Yes.
Okay. I love it when people are here because then you can tell I'm not lying to you.
I feel like I'm being disruptive.
No. Not at all. Anyway, so those are the differences in this. It just depends on where you are in the process about which makes more sense.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be under contract and someone would be going, look, if they don't, I love this house. If they don't, let me go ahead and I'll promise, I'll buy it. So you can do that. You know, it might be a way to set that up.
And if they get accepted as a backup offer, they still have the right to leave if it's not under contract.
I'm sorry?
So if they get an accepted backup offer, that offer is able to be withdrawn if they find another place that's ready to, you know, get under contract right away.
Well, with backup, if they're in backup position, the person who's active currently has to either default or elect to back out. And then backup one moves into first position.
But if backup number 3 says my chances of getting this house are very low, I'm willing to go with it until I find something else.
Yes.
But
Yeah, I had that happen too on my
Yeah.
house. I put in an offer on 13 acres and was the backup on that. And the day that my house, I got accepted that offer, I called them and said, "Oh, I'm under contract on a different house. Let's pull my backup."
Interesting.
Yeah. So no matter what backup, and that's why you want to use the backup addendum, because the backup addendum tells the seller, look, I'm in number one position, but I'm not going to stop looking.
Right.
So if I find something else, I can get out of yours.
Yeah.
But it locks you in, like, so that they don't go, "Oh, well, we actually want more money."
Right. Right. And so you don't have to put down the deposit yet, the binder.
It depends on how you wrote the offer.
Okay.
It depends on how it was negotiated. Actually, I should say it depends on the terms you went under contract with. You could potentially.
As a selling agent or the buying agent, would you try and secure it with the deposit or without?
With.
With.
I mean, if I'm the listing agent, I want to know that even if you're backup, you're still vested.
Yeah.
It might make you a little less inclined to go find that other property. And until I close, I want to make sure I've got everybody in line.
Yeah.
As the buyer's associate, the buyer's going to say, look, until I know I'm in first position, I don't want to put any money down. So that's when you may want to do a first and a second binder, $1,000 first and
Right.
$4,000 second. All right, I'll put $1,000 down to make you feel good.
Yeah. Okay. Makes sense.
This is why this is why when people look at this and try to make it boilerplate, drives me crazy, because every situation is different. Every situation is different. So you can't say, and when we're not advising our customers on what their options are, that's a problem.
Yeah.
You know, so they have either good information or know strategically how they might approach this. But before even we start talking to strategy, we have to say, process of elimination. Is this the one? And if this is the one you want to work with, here's some things that we can do to try and help you get it. But if it's maybe the one, then I don't know how strong you're going to be in these different aspects.
Right.
So it can't always, it's not always yes or no. The only other one I can think of is auction.
Oh, right.
And this is when there's a reserve. So they throw the property out there as available for sale. They say we're taking offers on such and such a day, such and such a time. One or more people submit offers. If they don't meet the reserve, all offers are negated, and the house goes back on the market.
Okay.
So I think that's all the different status options. So just if it's required or if it's needed, and then you just make sure that you check the box, and then you would put any additional terms or conditions. So that one statement that we talked about, buyer is not currently engaged in any other offers.
Right.
Might be here.
Not currently is the key word.
Any additional, strange things. So if you're walking through a house, this is something too. If you're walking through a house, so back to paragraph 3, repairs, replacements, treatments. If I'm walking through the house and that window is broken and I want that window replaced no matter what, if I put in here, front room window to be replaced prior to closing, then even if we don't agree to any repairs and replacements, that still has to be replaced. So, and then of course anything that would be required as part of the appraisal.
That would go there.
Oh, well, that wouldn't go there
Oh.
because we wouldn't have the appraisal yet, or we wouldn't have the contingencies on the appraisal to know.
Okay.
My friend, your tag is upside down.
You? One of those mornings.
I walked out into my driveway wearing my slippers before I realized I should have put on my shoes. So,
I love it.
if you decide
Thank you.
that you want to open a farm, I have 2 for sale right now
My husband was probably looking at them. I don't know. Where are they?
in Hastings.
Really?
I've got a 20-acre property that has a 9-stall barn with an apartment, and then a separate 7-stall and a 2-stall barn. And then I have another 20-acre facility that has barns that need to be finished out.
Okay.
If you know of anybody that lives in Indiana that wants to come bring their horses down here,
Oh, right. Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, my husband's done that over the idea of having a horse barn, but I don't think it's
Wow.
fast right now. Yeah. He has too much on his plate already.
I get it.
Yeah.
Complete agreement. So this is just acknowledging that the buyer and seller acknowledge a receiving copy of this. This is why electronic signature is so good, because it does provide them with an immediate copy once it's fully executed. It's also a great way to make sure all signatures get onto one space.
And so even if you're in person with them, you could bring your laptop or a tablet or something and have them sign electronically.
Absolutely. Sometimes people like to bring a hard copy to review them with, to write on, make signature, highlight things, and then send them the completed version electronically, have it signed, and then it's all stays
Okay.
in one place.
Okay.
Things are really important. The buyer and seller and the broker agree that the terms of this agreement constitute the entire agreement between them, and they have not received or relied on any representations. This reinforces the fact that they need to have their own inspections and need to look at those things and discuss with you. No prior or present agreements or representations will bind the buyer, seller, or brokers. This protects us, this protects the buyer, this protects the seller, make sure we don't have multiples on here. This agreement and any modifications to this agreement may be signed in counterparts. That was what you were asking about the other day. If you can't do it electronically, you have to do it hard copy, as long as both hard copies are identical and can be shown to be identical, even though they're just, this is signed by one party, party A, and this is signed by party B, then as long as you can put them together and there are no
Yeah.
differences, then signed
I'm
in
doing a
common
seller's
force.
one.
It's not a problem.
Okay.
Headings are for reference only. Some things have been bolded. In the performance of the terms and conditions of the agreement, each party will deal fairly and in good faith. But the other written notice to or from the broker for a party shall be noticed to or from that party. So when you talk to the other party,
Hi, Hazel.
that's like her telling her customer. When I talk to you, it's like me telling my customer. So you make
Is
sure.
he at it
okay?
again?
He's trying. You'll never be sure. You running the joint?
Huh?
You running the joint? Okay, good.
What do you need?
Oh.
He always smells so good. I have to hug him. Just smelling.
I love it. Seller agrees to sign all documents necessary to accomplish the sale transaction. So this is just one of those summary paragraphs. Look, you're going to do what you say you're going to do. You're going to do what you say. You haven't done anything else. You aren't into any other agreements. You aren't into any other agreements. We're here to help. We can't help if you've done other things. So kind of just remind them. The time is of the essence. Time is of the essence is the space that tells us, okay, great, this is how we have to respond. So, as used in this agreement, days means calendar days. Calendar days. Other than the time of acceptance, which ends on a Saturday, Sunday, or federal holiday, or national legal public holiday as observed, which is also known as federal holidays, shall extend to the next date, which is not a Saturday, Sunday, or federal holiday. And we end our days at 7 p.m. So what this means is if I go under contract on Wednesday, and I have a 10-day inspection period, that's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Since that time period ends on a Saturday, Sunday, or federal holiday, the next day it moves to, or the end time now moves to Monday. If I had a contract that the inspection period was ending this Saturday, it would actually move to Tuesday, because Monday is a federal holiday. So we have to watch those. You count all the days. People go, oh, it's Christmas. Monday, Tuesday, skip Christmas, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it happens to be. No, everything counts. Christmas counts, New Year's counts, any holiday counts.
Yeah.
Everything counts. It's just when the time period ends.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that's different is the time of acceptance. Time of acceptance can happen on any day of the week, any day of the month, any day of the year. So that's the only thing that can happen on a federal holiday is the date of acceptance. And that's because day one starts the day after.
Mm-hmm.
Buyers and sellers notices. Buyer represents that they have not entered into any other agreements. Escrow disclosure. We do not have an escrow account, so we don't have to worry about that. But if we have one, this tells them that we can collect interest. At some point, you're going to have to give your social security number. We don't collect it here. Do you know that we used to? When I first started, we had to take the social security number and put it onto the purchase and sale agreement and the listing agreement. We had to destroy all those files.
Yeah. When did that stop?
Let's see. We went from in '97 we had to use the full social security number. By 2001, I think it was the last 4 digits, and I think by 2002 or 3 it was.
I saw you. I was on the phone, but I thought I saw you go by the corner of my eye.
But they still have to provide it where?
Oh, they have to provide it to the title company.
Oh, okay.
They're going to be asked at some point. 1031 exchange. Have you guys done those?
Yes.
Okay, so you're familiar. They have to go through a licensed exchange mediator. The funds can be transferred. The funds must go to that individual. All funds. We have 180 days from the time of closing to identify one or more properties to invest. You cannot hold any funds out of the 1031 exchange.
Right.
Payoff authorization. The seller hereby authorizes the closing agent or settlement agent to obtain the mortgage payoff letters, which is good. And then FIRPTA, just because it's fun to say, Foreign Investor and Real Property Tax Act, FIRPTA. Kind of weird. Just so we're clear with buyers, they do need to acknowledge if they're a foreign investor at least 10 days prior to closing. If you are a foreign investor selling, according to the listing agreement, you'll see that a portion of the proceeds may be held in escrow until it can be confirmed that you've paid your taxes, or if monies are needed to pay taxes on the sale.
Okay.
And that's anywhere from 15 to 25%, 10 to 25%, excuse me. Assignability. We talked yesterday about the fact that this purchase and sale agreement is automatically assignable. So I can assign it, no problem. But these are the options when it comes to assignability. Either I, the buyer, can assign this and thereby be released from any further liability. So if I negotiate with you, my equitable title allows me to assign it to Jesse. If I assign it to Jesse and this first box is checked, once I've assigned it to her, I'm out. I have no responsibility. The second option is the buyer may assign this but not be released from the liability of this agreement. So if I assign it to her and then she doesn't close, I'm still responsible. And then the third one is that it's not assignable. So just be aware, when you get offers on a listing and it's the first one, buyer may assign this and release liability, or the buyer may assign this and still have liability, 8 out of 10 times, it's an investor.
Which one is that?
1 or 2, option 1 or 2.
Okay.
8 out of 10 times it's an investor. Really be very, very careful. Unfortunately, investors are getting bad raps right now.
Yeah.
Just the way they're handling transactions.
Yeah.
Time of acceptance. So time of acceptance, you propose. So this is what happens when you submit your offer. You propose to the seller, I would like to hear back from you by this date, this time. If they don't respond to you by that date and that time, technically it's withdrawn. No comment. No offer.
Right.
Can a seller resurrect an offer? Sure. A seller could say, I'd like to go ahead and accept your offer. Does the buyer have to? No. They may have moved on to something else.
Mm-hmm.
Can it be resurrected? Absolutely. So can a seller make an offer to a buyer? Definitely. If you have a house that's been shown 3 times by the same agent and they brought the same person, go ahead. Write them an offer. You
The
can do that.
seller?
Yeah.
No, I thought it was always told that you can't. No?
No, seller can absolutely write an offer to a buyer.
Hmm.
Absolutely, we've had that happen. An agent had or one of our listing agents had an agent who came over to their house twice with the same buyer, and the agent kept saying, "Well, they're really interested, but they're not." I mean, there's just something that can't get them off the mark. So our agent, we had talked about it, and I said, "Have your seller write an offer." So what do you mean, have your seller? I said, "Have the seller write an offer to the buyer. See if they'll accept the offer." And they didn't accept the offer, but they negotiated, went under contract. It's a bilateral contract. I'm the seller, I can start it. I'm the seller, I can disagree. You're the buyer, you can disagree. We just have to negotiate.
Yeah.
So either way works. The second line is, if we decide to counteroffer each other, how long are those counteroffers good for? And this one, the default is 24 hours. The time to respond and the time to negotiate have diminished greatly in this market. People are asking for faster responses.
Yeah, makes sense.
And then we talked about wire fraud. Just be careful. If someone's wiring money because they're out of the area or out of state or because it's easier for them, just make sure they know the guidelines. Don't do anything until I tell you to do something.
Yeah.
Until I confirm that, until I get us in a three-way call and everybody knows what's going on. It's just too easy to lose money.
Yeah.
The date of acceptance is the last date on this or any accompanying documents. That would include a counteroffer agreement, any amendments or addenda. What's written supersedes what's printed. So if we have a negotiation period, we have to figure out what's next. And then you identify the buyers. This is the only place you identify their marital status. So if buyer 1 is married and buyer 2 is married, but they're not married to each other, you still have to identify them as married.
Okay.
And then you really want to get the story.
Yeah.
If they're each single, they're each single. If one's married, one's single, you would just identify the marital status of the individual. And then this is the section we do not fill out. This is that section related to the escrow account that reflects that we've received the money and identifies this document as a receipt, so we don't fill that out. And then the listing and selling brokerage information comes below that. If you're writing an offer, customarily the listing broker will provide, or listing associate will provide, offer instructions which identify all missing pieces of information that can't automatically be pulled from MLS.
Okay.
And that is the listing, that's the purchase and sale agreement.
All right. Yeah.
A little over, sorry.
No.
Sorry, Dave.
Now I'm early. You still got time.
Not much. But anyway, so that's the purchase and sale agreement.
Okay.
Now, in your packet, so in addition, what we've done is provide, this one as an example. Here, this is an
Is this what I
example.
have or no?
Yes.
Oh no. Okay.
Yeah. So this is you have the conventional example, and then what we've also done is provide some additional information. So FHA financing, when you're working with an FHA buyer, there are certain things you want to know. First of all, the loan limits are really set by county, but they're actually great. I mean, they're almost $500,000 for an FHA buyer.
Right.
And an FHA buyer has to have,
Oh, it's for 32.
thank you. Okay. Not really close to 5. Okay.
Close. Close enough.
So 432, not bad. An FHA buyer has to have some money to put down. So the minimum requirement is 3.5%. If they have more, they can get more. With FHA, there are 2 mortgage insurance premiums. Have you guys used FHA at all?
I think we have ones, yes.
Okay, so there are 2 mortgage insurance premiums. There's the upfront mortgage insurance premium. And the way that that's calculated, it's calculated based on the loan amount. So the loan amount, it's 1 point, where did I put that? Just other mortgage insurance premiums. So this is page 22 and 23. The mortgage insurance premium for the annual, for the upfront is 1.75%. So if I've got a $100,000 loan, then it's $1,750 I have to pay up front. That mortgage insurance premium can be rolled into the loan. Even if I've reached my maximum qualifying amount, I can still roll it into the loan. That doesn't affect what I can pay, but I do have to pay that up front. And again, it can either be paid up front in cash or it can be paid by wrapped into your note.
Okay.
With FHA loans, again, it's for the primary residence. There are really two types of FHA loans. There's just a standard FHA 203B program. So when I said, have you ever had an FHA loan? So I think once. You didn't say, well, I've had an FHA 203B program once. That's just the standard FHA program. There's another type of FHA loan called the FHA 203K loan, and it's an improvement loan.
Oh, no.
Okay, so that's the type of loan that I can get a loan to buy the house and the money to do the improvements. But it's still supposed to be for my primary residence. The upfront mortgage insurance premium has to be paid. And again, it can be folded in. The annual mortgage insurance premium is actually collected on a monthly basis as part of what goes into your escrow account. And then your lender pays it annually. The mortgage, there was a time that the mortgage insurance premium was charged on an FHA loan that you could petition to have that removed when the loan to value ratio reached 78%. Not the case anymore. It sticks on with the life of the loan. Again, bubble, FHA realized, shorten the sun backup. We have to figure this out. They changed the guidelines. FHA mortgage insurance premium 99% of the time will stay on the loan until you either pay it off or refinance it. So just to be aware of that. You can put down more than 3.5%. It adjusts your mortgage insurance premium if you put down more. Why would someone want to put down more and use FHA? Maybe they've had a difficult time with their credit score. Maybe they had a foreclosure or a short sale or something.
Or to be approved for more.
Yeah. So you can see how the mortgage insurance premiums are calculated for the annual. So it's this percentage times the loan amount divided by 12 is what's collected into your escrow account. Again, there are the two different types. There's the 203B and the 203K. The main advantage of the 203K is it's for you can get the money to fix up the property. It's not easy because what they do is they give you the money to buy the property, and then the installments to do the repairs, to make the improvements, are done based on not only what the contractor is doing, but what FHA believes needs to be done. So you may say, I want granite countertops, and FHA says, I don't care if you want granite countertops. All we want to do is get countertops in there. So you may think $4,000 for granite countertops, they may say, we're giving you $2,000, right? So, and then they won't cut the check until to the contractor until they come and inspect. And there's only 2 people that do these inspections. So sometimes there's a delay and a lag, and sometimes it takes longer to get the approval. So contractors working with this situation are prepared to work on multiple properties at one time, which can also be a deterrent for the person trying to get something done. The good thing is that based on what you initially present as what you would like to have done and what FHA agrees to have done to the property and the amount that they allot you, they usually allot you 110% of what they believe the appraised value will be after the improvements are done. So you do have that wiggle room, so you can usually end up in the granite countertop versus just, for like So it works out. Usually works out okay for FHA loans. FHA loans, of course, win-win type of situation. You don't have to have excellent credit, lower down payment, so not so bad. And it is workable with all of our primary or our preferred lenders. There is an example of how to write an FHA loan. It is exactly the same as any other type of loan. Gosh, this one's wrong too. I need to give you. So the 15,000 would come out here. 2,500, 13, 325. That should be right. 10, 13. Yeah, that should be about right. With that amount, those numbers should add up. So FHA will add up. The only one that doesn't add up is VA.
Okay.
Everything else you'll find in here is pretty much the same, except don't forget, you need to put that number on line 59, and you would check the FHA box. Otherwise, pretty much it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Nothing real different in the purchase and sale agreement.
Okay.
If you'll pop over to VA, with VA financing, this is a guaranteed loan, FHA insured. Sorry, page 39. So with VA, it is guaranteed versus insured, which is FHA. It is an opportunity for 100% financing for the veteran, which is great, good opportunity. There is no mortgage insurance premium that goes along with it. There is a VA funding fee that's paid. And just like FHA, the VA funding fee can be rolled into the loan amount. So even if I hit my maximum qualification, I can still go ahead and get a loan and roll in my funding fee. The interesting thing about, one of the interesting things about this is the amount in our market is 5 something. $647,200.
Wow.
It goes up over $1 million in other areas.
Wow.
So,
Where does it say that?
page 45.
Wow.
So, might be an option. With your VA borrowers, oh, and the cool thing, so there's the VA funding fee. Not cool, it's not a good word.
Mm-hmm.
With the VA funding fee, the VA funding fee can be waived if the individual's on disability.
Okay.
So an individual who enters the military is considered 100% able, and then as things occur, their ability drops. So once I start receiving disability pay from the government for VA, the funding fee is waived.
Interesting.
Yeah. Spouses of military individuals who passed away while on active duty can get a VA loan. So, we always, especially in this market, we're so heavy military.
Yeah.
You always want to be talking, if someone's approaching you, if your customer is interested, or you want to make sure you clarify whether they have the option for that, for VA loan, based on service or based on being married to someone who's provided service.
Okay.
The amount of, we have a county limit, like 647, but the individual qualifies, the military person qualifies for an amount based on their eligibility, their level in the military. So some may qualify for 300, but they get a certificate of eligibility which has a lump sum on it. They're not intended to have more than one at a time. However, if an individual is transferred from one base to another and the bases are more than 50 miles apart, they may end up having 2 loans at the same time if they buy one over here and still have this one. Customarily, the VA likes to see that you're going to sell this one. However, when the market was really tight, they allowed them to rent and still have that second, as long as the combined energies didn't exceed their maximum eligibility. So but it's not intended for second homes, investment properties. That's not what it's intended for.
Right.
So if I've only used up $300 of my $600,000 eligibility, I can't go out and buy a $200,000 investment property.
Right.
Obviously, lower no down payment on this. Of course, you can get a VA loan and have a down payment. That's on page 41. The one-time funding fee is based on the amount that you put down and the length of the loan. So it's the amount and the time. And the chart on the next page shows you how the funding fee is calculated for standard military. If they put down 0, it's 2.5% the first time. Additional times they use it, the funding fee is 3.3%. Reserves and National Guards, this is their scale. They qualify after going active or after 6 years as a reservist or National Guard. There's really no minimum credit score, however, the lenders that provide VA loans set a minimum credit score. The VA borrower still does have to show that they have sufficient income to repay it.
Mhm.
So, and the VA loan limit does vary by county. So in California, it's over $1 million.
Yeah.
100% financing on $100 million property, not bad, right?
Yeah.
And with bankruptcies and short sales and stuff, we find that VA borrowers are able to qualify more quickly within a year or 2 years. And there is a VA example there. So this $20,000 would be credited towards closing costs. VA example, not much different. Just select VA.
Mhm.
Kind of self-explanatory. now.
Right. Mhm. Yeah.
And then don't forget on the closing costs, just make sure you identify VA funding. Page 50 of the packet, page 5 of 12 of the.
I wrote that.
Otherwise, it's pretty much the same.
Okay.
That's it.
Perfect. Thank you.
That's what we got for you on the purchase and sale agreement.
Perfect. Thank you. And so tomorrow, what is
Tomorrow's
tomorrow?
the buyer consult.
I'm excited for that.